It's 9:02 on December 21st. We'll first stand for the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, if you could remain standing for the prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of our community. Help us to make decisions that will bring answers to our islanders as we work towards our future. Amen. Okay. Before we start, I would just like to have something out of order here. I really appreciate the nomination of chair, and I just feel like I really loved being vice chair, and if Anita will accept the chair position, I would love to change with her and move forward. I would like to make a motion for that effect, if you will accept, Anita.
Sure.
I think we'll have much more quicker meetings.
John, is there anything more?
No,
Can we just say we're going to flip?
You certainly can do that. I mean, it's within the discretion of.
I mean, provided it's okay with the rest of the members.
Provided that the majority of those present vote to do so, it's certainly within your discretion. If Ms. Plummer feels that she's, given all the current circumstances, it would be better for her to stay as revert back to vice chair, and for Mayor Saracita to take over as the chair, then that's the motion on the table. And assuming there's a second, then you put it to vote.
Seconded by Patrick. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And it passes 4-1.
Okay.
You are now the
Jane.
chair.
All right.
And I'm the vice chair. Oh, and we have a new timer so that I could stay on track, and now it's Anita's turn.
And it's not going to make noise.
Yeah, and not scare me to death.
Okay, well, the first item on the agenda is an approval of minutes, but they were not distributed, didn't I? So
We didn't get any.
we didn't get them. So we'll just put this on the next meeting.
Yes, I'm sorry. Usually the system automatically sticks it in there, but yes,
They weren't here.
we'll include it.
Okay. In the last meeting, we agreed that we were going to put public comment at the front of the meeting. So for future reference, could we have public comment on agenda items only at the front end of the meeting, and then public comment at the end will be for anything anybody wants to say? So I'm going to move that ahead of the public hearings. So is there anybody here who'd like to speak on something having to do with the agenda, which is floodplain or setbacks? And if you want to speak on, what, Jane?
I believe the discussion was that they would have the public discussion on anything at the beginning, and then those public discussions on the hearings would be at the hearing.
They would be on the hearing, but generally, well, at least the way the council does it, at the front end, public comment pertains to the agenda, anything on the agenda. Like if we had, like maybe somebody wanted to say what our priority list should be. Anything on the agenda, they speak at the front end of the agenda, and then at the end, anybody can say whatever they want to say. But that's, John, do you?
No, that's consistent with the procedure that the town council follows, where you have public comment at the beginning of the meeting, then obviously items that require a public hearing, such as ordinances and quasi-judicial items, then certainly people would have the opportunity to speak to those items. And then if it's if it's the desire of the LPA, then we can also, just as the town council have a public comment section at the very end.
I think we should,
assuming anyone's still around.
Do you guys agree with that?
Yep.
So we'll do so on the next agenda.
Okay. For now, does anybody have anything to say relative to the agenda? Any public comment? Can you get a copy? Do we have copies of the agenda?
The only thing on the agenda is the billing codes and floodplain management.
We're good. She's going to make copies of it for you. Okay? Wait, sir, hold on. So public comment is just strictly public comment. It's not a question and answer period. I'm sorry. I'm sorry? Okay, well, do you have public comment?
I do, but I didn't know if it was related to the agenda or anything.
Only to the agenda. So come on up.
Hi, my name is Joe. Is this working? It's on? There. Hey, you ready? My name is Joe Blvd. I'm a professional engineer. For 20 years, went to University of Florida. I live on the beach at 385 Denora Boulevard. I want to give you guys my cards right now so you can get to my website.
Thank you, Joe.
I've just emailed a document to town council probably for the 20th time, and the town manager that I hear is on contract, who's an out-of-town person. I have a ranch in Sarasota with a unique underground river that has alkaline spring water. It's an antioxidant that we're coming down the CSX railroad, and you're going to get lower water bills and alkaline spring water to the tap better than anything we've seen on the planet. There's a case, Joe Blvd. Versus Carmine Marcino, where I keep getting subdued by the government, and he tried to do a school shooting at Lexington Middle that caused the superintendent to resign, as they have me approach for a COVID thing on the kid. So you can Google Blvd. Versus Pentagon. It's a very serious issue. This is a regional water supply. I have another one. I'm meeting Eric Adams in New York. New York City has an issue with their aqueducts. That one's a buried volcano. This one's a meteor impact from a tilted platform. The concern I have is the council and the local Lee County Commission has taken extreme efforts to block this water supply. Tap water is based on cancer rates. When you take a shower, you soak in a liter of water. This is a huge economic driver for the town, and it's being ignored, and the media is hiding it. There's a thing called the Smith-Mundt Act that was turned on America with the CIA the day I opened this resource at Swipmont in May 2012, where Hollywood and CIA fabricate a story for fabricated news on America, where they're allowed to do fake, real, and combined terrorism on America with the CIA. And it has taken place along the timeline of my efforts to get you this water supply. So what I'm asking the town to do is contact Lee County in writing and copy me on why this thing's hidden, and call the news teams and ask them why they would hide alkaline pure spring water with no arsenic, no contaminants, to the tap with lower water bills. I think it's everybody's fiduciary duty here, considering they're stacking kids in cancer centers with Medicaid fraud, Governor Scott. So you're going to see fantastic things on that card there in my website. You can Google Joe Blvd PE. Nobody's moving this underground river. It takes 5 minutes to do the quality test and a 2-hour pump report, and I have the deeds. So I already have the permits. I'm not asking for any money. I'm asking for leadership. Where is the leadership? So your town council, I approached your chair just now. He said he didn't know about it yet. I've emailed the town council for 5 years straight. When I tried to present before, suddenly I get a no trespassing issue at City Hall. The time I presented to the school board in 2014, suddenly the media came in here and shut down the school in a Christmas party to embarrass me and my family, to again block this resource to the town. So basically you're going to get better fire protection, and I have the fire marshal hiding this. So what I'm going to do, if I don't see any reaction from the town, I'm going to file suit, and I'm going to include the Pentagon in that case too. So I'm asking you nicely to recognize the resource. I'm also asking, where is
Mr. Blvd, I'm sorry, I have to call your time.
All right, I'm going to go another subject after this.
Okay, no, your time is up.
Aren't we allowed to talk about different subjects, Council?
You'll have 3 minutes again at the end of the meeting.
But that's for agenda items.
Mr. Blvd, your time is up.
Can I address the council, please?
Mr. Blvd, your time is up. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Yes, ma'am?
Is it just open comment or on some specific?
This is on agenda items. The agenda items right now refer to priority lists. So Mr. Blvd's item about water quality and whatnot would be a priority list for the council in the future, perhaps?
Not on the agenda. I was waiting for just open public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anybody else care to make public comment? All right, we'll close the public comment and move on to the first item. We'll move on to the first item, which is public hearing on LDC text amendment, building codes, and floodplain management. Floodplain management ordinance, amend Article 4, floodplain regulations to update various sections to comply with state and federal law, provide for higher standards within a coastal A zone, and to implement local flood regulations. Jason?
Hey, good morning.
Is
Jason
Kristen
Green.
here? No.
I'm sorry?
Is Kristen coming or no? Kristen?
Yes, I thought she was, but I'll cover until then.
And you know what, before we go any further?
Yes.
The vice chair just reminded me that we didn't take roll.
Oh, that's right.
If we could just say who's present today.
Don Suddeth.
Pavanas.
Anita Saracita. And absent are Scott Safford, Doug Eklund, and I'm drawing a blank on our newest member's name. The gentleman that just recently joined us.
Jim.
And I apologize. I apologize that I don't recall his name,
Well, we have a quorum.
but we have a quorum. Okay, we'll move on.
Okay.
And Kristen's here. Okay, Jason, go ahead.
Like I said, Jason Green, Community Development. The first few pages of the draft ordinance, I'm going to skip over that. There's a few whereases in there that we're going to keep in, that are important for us to keep. That's a legal part of it. So I'm not going to jump into that. I want to jump into the attachments, which are Exhibit A and B. The way this is set up is Exhibit A is dealing with the building codes related section of the ordinance. And then Exhibit B is the floodplain management side of it. So if it's all right with you, I was going to go kind of page by page and just highlight a couple items.
Okay.
There's strike through underline, but there's also a couple sections I want to point out that don't have any edits to them, and I want to bring them up to you in case you want to address those issues.
Okay.
So I'm starting on Exhibit A, which is, I believe, packet page 8 out of 58 on yours. And so there's no, as you can see, there's no changes to this page.
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are our permit prices the same as the Lee counties?
I have no idea. I don't know what Lee counties are.
Well, I mean, you refer to Lee County Administrative Code, and under permit fees?
Well, yeah, so essentially we can change it. It says unless other permit or fee, the town council sets those fees annually with the budget.
Okay.
Or other times, but generally we try to do updates to those fees, building, administrative, Parks and Rec, all those departments. We try to do those updates for fees with the budget, generally
Okay.
speaking. And that way it can kind of tie it to the programming for the next year and all that. But yes, we could probably just cross that out.
Yeah, I just was wondering.
That's fine. No, that's fair.
Jason, just a quick question. As you go through this, are you going to give us commentary, big picture, or because I think it'd be helpful to get that?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I think some items will draw out a conversation specifics. For example, in a couple pages, there'll be something specific, very detailed, and some of it is more big picture. Unfortunately, we're not able to print maps for you. We try to give you the digital set, so hopefully you were able to kind of pan around the town a little bit and see some of the changes or some areas that maybe you're familiar with. But we can get more into those geographic areas also if you want. So Exhibit A, as I said, the first page, not many changes. We could edit that permit fees just to remove the Lee County. That's fair. Page 9, the second page of the exhibit, there's no proposed changes. And again, most of this section is a lot of stuff that is either updates or amendments to the building code that are local amendments. And then also you'll see a lot of strike through that are things that are already in the building code that we don't need in here. So I'll keep going.
I have another question.
Yes.
Okay, so once again, it goes back to Lee County on
Board of Adjustments and Appeals.
6-73, and it says that Lee County has established separate boards of adjustment and appeals.
Correct.
To arbitrate the matter. So we go to them and not here.
For that case, yes. Now that's a building code issue. I don't believe we do not have a board, and that's my understanding is we still defer to them on the what is it called? The contractor and adjustment side. You said 73, right?
7-3, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
No, that's not variances. That's not any of those other local decisions. That's
understand.
just a contractor issue. And it's always, obviously, that's always open to the town's right to establish those boards. It just always has been deferring to them because of the size of our town. I believe the other communities do that also right now.
Okay.
Okay.
The next page, no proposed changes to that. There's some additional probably cleanup as building codes change, and we'll have to come back and edit to this. As you can see, references to section 103.1 and all these others. Some of this will be copy and paste in building code stuff that we'll have to update. But again, no major change, nothing changed on this page, page 11.
Don, Patrick, if you have any questions, just say so, okay?
Yep. Thanks.
Go ahead, Go ahead, Jason.
Again, minor repairs, all this information from related to the building side on page 12. No changes. And page 13 is where we can,
wait.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had questions.
Yeah, please interrupt me.
On page 12, Jane?
Yeah. On 104.1.6.2, does all the work after Ian, when a permit is made, have to be done within 6 months?
I believe that's the building code that, I think you have to have an inspection. I don't know if Steve wants to come up and
Well,
answer that.
You can have inspections that don't final the permit, but if you can't get supplies or certain things can't come in, you can get 2 extensions or up to
I believe
no
there's
more
some,
than
I believe there's
90
some
days?
extensions, correct.
Okay, and does it cost to get an extension?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and you have to do
does.
that 30 days
It does
prior.
cost. It does cost,
So
yes.
that's, I just want to repeat that so people out there understand some of this stuff, that they're not going to read this package
Correct.
and don't know that they have 6 months to complete it, and
Right.
30 days prior to the permit ending, they have to ask for an extension, and you can only get 2 for 90 days.
Right.
So
Most
that-
of our contractors have worked with us and familiar with this. It's the same in most communities. So.
Okay.
But those owners that are going to contract for themselves.
Correct.
Exactly,
Well,
especially right now.
Right.
yes, I would always suggest owners get actively involved and familiar, because you're right. I think a lot of times they need to know the process. That would help them understand what their contractor is telling them. Correct.
And Jane, and if you can confirm that, Jason, I think it's first inspection. Once you begin that process,
Right.
and you keep getting inspections, your permit stays open. So you
But
can
that's not-
extend it significantly by doing so.
That's not the entire, in 104.1.6.3, the entire foundation must, oh wait, sorry. First inspection permit is completed within 6 months.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, thanks.
So the page 13 in your packet is where we have a lot of strike through. And again, the conversation, and again, I failed to, this draft has been worked on with the State Floodplain Management Office. And so there's some things that we've ultimately changed between our first conversation a couple weeks ago and now, because things are in motion that we didn't know about, or State Floodplain Management became aware of, so that we've tried to work some of that in here. But this section is basically already in the building code or covered by other sections. So in doing this, we're trying to streamline and not be repetitive of things that are already in another code or document. There's no need to have it and have multiple pages that are unnecessary. So the portions that are being stricken, my understanding are those are building code related, and we don't need them in our local ordinance.
So this might be a good time, Jason, for you to explain to us a little big picture here. So my understanding is there are certain requirements that are in here that are mandated by FEMA, okay? And some of it, we are elevating our standards on the beach, and those are optional. And I'd like you to explain what is required versus what is optional, so we have a good understanding of that, because
Sure.
the optional portion is where I've got concerns, but I want to understand why, and is this a good thing, or is this, does it change our rating? Is
Okay.
there evidence that we need to go to higher standard or not? No, that
I agree.
So that's a good question. It's a lot more nuanced than just required, not required. So if I use too much floodplain management speak, stop me. All requirements are optional if your community wants to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay? Not all options are, not everything's optional. It's optional if you want to participate in the program. What that means is you can't get a mortgage if you don't participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay?
You cannot get a
You
mortgage,
cannot.
period.
Anybody with a mortgage, a federally backed mortgage, is required to have flood insurance. So therefore, if your community doesn't do the minimum standards that FEMA and the federal government, Senate, the Congress is established, then you don't get mortgages that are federally backed, essentially. So that's the minimum. That's us just adopting it and agreeing to do the minimum. Over the years, many of those minimums and other standards have been adopted into the Florida Building Code. So where it used to be all local ordinance adopting and complying, a lot of it's been incorporated into our building code. Our state is kind of ahead of the curve somewhat on that and in doing that. The difference is I think what you're referring to, the minimum of national flood insurance program, then there's the CRS program, Community Rating System program, again, as a choice for a community to participate in, with an opportunity to increase the discount that is on every policyholder's insurance, flood insurance. So the lower the number, 10 to 1, the closer to 1 you get, the higher that discount. We're at a 5, so I believe we're at 25% discount right now. And as you go back towards 10, it gets less, right? Everything you're talking about is what we call a higher standard. That would be above and beyond what's in building code or the minimum standards, would help in theory towards those points that they evaluate in the CRS program. But minimum standards of the NFIP are like, you have to be above base flood. Parking, storage, access below flood. Those types of common things we talk about, those are minimum requirements that we have to do.
So with what's being proposed today in its entirety, do we get enough points to bring us to 6?
No.
Or are we,
I can't tell you that because the manual changes and where they put an emphasis on points changes. The challenge for any town, especially small town, is getting points. In getting points is because there's a big, I guess, emphasis on open space.
Yeah.
And so you have mostly counties get low ratings because, or I guess low numbers, high rating, because they can have larger swaths, tracts of land that get preserved. A lot of communities have environmental lands programs where they purchase lands and put them in preservation. That counts towards your CRS
It's a
rating.
benefit Sanibel has over us.
Right, and you also have Cape Coral, I believe, has a park or a national forest or park, whatever it is there.
Yeah, Bonita did the same thing.
City of Ocala. Ocala has a national forest, right? All those things give you a huge amount of points. Small communities, it's harder to add that up. So I don't know what the next manual will be, and those points shift between categories, but there are some things that we try to focus on that your return on investment, so to speak. Yeah. You don't want to chase something that's a huge impact to property owners and returns very few points.
Is it generally accurate to say that because of our limited geography and limited space, we're probably not going to get to 6? So we're at a 5?
We were at a 7.
Okay.
And I would say work some magic. And the staff here and us and our team was just really very diligent in trying to push through that. And we had some things that were in place that maybe we didn't realize or take credit for before. So it all added up to a 5. And just the way the manual worked out, I don't know that we'll be able to keep the 5. That's realistic. But the difference is about 5% or so. I think it goes from 25 down to 20, maybe down to 15%.
Kristen, wait, do you have time to stay with us through this meeting? Will you come sit up here and so you're on a microphone just in case, because I see you going like this,
Yes.
just in case you've got something to say. I'd appreciate having your input.
So thank you for doing that, and I should have done that. But
No,
Kristen's been very instrumental.
Absolutely.
Very
It's
instrumental in
a
all
team.
this. She's shy, doesn't like to talk, but she yells
shy?
at me. So
I've never known her to be shy, but okay.
she gives me her opinion, that's for sure.
Based on what he said, my question would be, are we, the standards that we are implementing, does it put us at the minimum standards of a 5 so that we have more flexibility, or are we at the top of a 5 because we're pushing?
Do you mean for NFIP or CRS?
Yes, both.
We have to do the minimum if, in reality, in my opinion, you're crazy as a community if you don't do the minimum. CRS, again, is a choice. The needle has moved on what the minimum for CRS is, and we'll get to it, but as an example, there's a section here about mobile homes and replacement based on flood or not flood and elevation. That has shifted to being a requirement. Is it to get a 9, right?
Kristen, pull that microphone to you and tell us what you
the
think.
requirement that we've modified in here is to be able to keep at least a 9. So it became the entryway to the 9. If you don't do it, then you don't even get the 9, which is, why wouldn't you at least do that? So it's almost forced our hand to do that.
Is, are we asking for standards that aren't going to help us get anyplace else? That might be restricting
I
other
think
things?
I think it's an evolving thing. I don't know the manual right now, so do we have extra points that we could go back and reduce some of the extra standards later on? Maybe. I can't answer. I don't think there's anything substantial in here as far as additional
Okay,
requirements.
just ask.
I would say it's probably the other
What you were
way.
asking, kind of?
Yeah, so as you go along, can you tell us what is a minimum versus
Yes.
where we elevate those standards? And then I think what Jane might be saying, what I'm trying to say is that philosophically, what I think is we need to meet minimum requirements for sure. Anything that we decide to go above and beyond what the minimum is, we need to provide data analysis demonstrating the need for. So I'm going to have some questions as you go along,
Sure.
but if we're going to straddle our citizens with extra costs and possibly extra permitting and procedures, we have to be able to justify it. And it'd be great to have it, and it's a better construction method, but if we don't have evidence demonstrating that the existing construction method in the Florida Building Code are deficient, then in my mind, we don't put that extra cost onto residents.
I don't think there's anything in here that, I think there's actually more flexibility at this point, to be honest with you, of what in this than there was before.
Okay.
Kristen, do you have any comment on that?
No. Right now, really what's changing is what's required, and
Right. We're being reactive to the new requirements, shifting on that, and I don't think there's anything substantially higher standard in
no,
here.
it's just with the new coastal A zones.
Right, and we'll get to that, the coastal A zone part. But again, that was a decision internally of, we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I told you last time, the coastal A zones mostly reflect the
Yeah.
old V zone. A higher standard, we get credit for a higher standard. It's the same construction techniques and standards that somebody had the last 15 years. There's not a lot of harm there. There's no different. Most people come in with plans already or talking about, they didn't realize it's changed. They didn't know. They knew where the V zone was. They didn't know about this coastal A. They were already planning for construction in that V zone. It's the same thing. So,
Okay.
So can you explain that to me? Because I don't know if I understand that. So you were saying a lot of the coastal A zone is consistent with the
old map V zone,
Yes.
the coastal A zone overlaps where the old V zone was. So the V zone is shifted towards the beach, and the coastal A is in its place. I can't say it matches exactly, but it's pretty close. Yeah. So the coastal A has created flexibility and locally to choose your policy. So those people that are now in a coastal A were in a V zone for the most part. So if they came in today, November 1st to build, they would be under a V zone standard. Today the proposal is to maintain them under a V zone standard.
And that's hard for me to understand because, first place I looked on the map was my property,
Right.
my neighborhood. And I can tell you, in my neighborhood, my entire street went from an A zone to coastal A zone.
From an A zone to a coastal A zone?
Yeah, just,
Okay.
we were all AE 11 or 12, and now we're all coastal A because little arrows are
Sure.
pointing. So,
But we also want to remind you that it's a risk tolerance, right? Because coastal A is not an A. Coastal A is the recognition by FEMA mapping partners that waves don't go 3 feet in height and then stop. Right? The waves don't know, Mother Nature doesn't know where that line is. So it's the modeling of the wave naturally as you go over land reduces. So it's that area where it's going from maybe a 3-foot wave down to a 1.5-foot wave, but there's still wave action, there's still structural damage potentially from that wave action, more so than still water elevation, which is what you see further inland, is just high levels of water, but not necessarily the pounding of the waves against a structure. And frankly, part of that decision on our side, again, you guys can make that recommendation to change. Part of our decision on that was we saw a lot of structures damaging other structures. So ensuring that in that wave area that we're not having that again where other structures are being damaged by other structures. If a wave's damaging structures, that's one thing, but if you're seeing structures damaging other structures, that's what we're trying to avoid in the future. And I think it increases the percentage of chance of survival from these structures if you don't have other structures banging into you, frankly. So that was some of the rationale behind why we went that route. But that's a lot of that's going to be further down if you want to get into it. So, but yes, I don't think there's anything substantial as far as a higher standard other than that a coastal A conversation.
well, should we-
Another example of a higher standard is you get credit in CRS if you're less 50% rural. That's been a conversation for weeks and weeks now. If you adopt something less than 50%, you get points. It doesn't say how much. So you could adopt 45% instead of 50%. And all of a sudden you get 50 or 100 points kind of thing, or 49%, right? There's ways to kind of use the system also to your advantage that don't make a huge impact financially on that decision making that could potentially get the town more points. We haven't done that here, but that's just an example of, it says less than 50%. So,
You know, I have a feeling that people who are listening to this on YouTube or wherever the heck they're listening to this, it sounds like the Charlie Brown teacher. Wah,
It
wah,
does.
wah, 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 wah. And the bottom line is, what the CRS is community rating system,
Right.
and all of that impacts your flood insurance. Bottom line, all of this impacts flood insurance.
it's absolutely a choice.
Every single detail.
And I've worked in communities that decided not to participate.
Right.
It wasn't worth the staff time, wasn't worth it's a lot of time. We spent a lot of time trying to comply with it and show compliance. But in communities that do it, they get motivated and they want to get a lower or higher rating, lower number, right?
Yep.
So it's an interesting thing. It's either you really want to do it and do the best you can at it, or you just forego it. Nobody hangs out and is really proud of an 8 or 9. You know what I mean? They either want to get to a 5 or not do it at all.
Agreed, but I think what Patrick and Jane were saying or getting at is, if there is something that we're doing that increases costs for construction or for anything else for a property owner, what's the law of diminishing returns on what we're doing and what it's ultimately going to save in somebody's flood insurance rate versus what it's going to cost to produce the product?
Yes, because also there's a lot of people that don't get flood insurance in this community.
Of course, absolutely, especially, and I think that we'll see more and more of that.
And so now you have the two factors of, but I do get flood insurance, so I want you to have a higher standard
Yeah.
so that I get a discount
Yeah.
versus...
Yeah, versus I don't care.
Right.
I'm going to build
So
it.
there's an internal
Yeah.
conflict in the town,
Okay.
exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So I think a perfect example is if we deal with what's coming up here about stem walls, that's on this page.
Sure.
I think we can have that discussion and kind of understand where you guys are coming from. And again, this is not my area of expertise. I did talk to some colleagues of ours that you know, Elizabeth Fountain,
Right.
who's a statewide expert on floodplain issues, and she gave me some pointers.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll relay that to you guys, and
Sure.
you can tell me what you think and take it from there.
Don, did you have any comment? No. Okay. So we're on page 14 of 58.
Sure. So all that's stricken because, or 13 was stricken because of, essentially it's repeat and doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, but you know, R322 1.12, the enclosure of 100% of the area below an elevated building. This is
Oh, I'm sorry, you're on 14.
I'm on, yeah, that's
I'm sorry.
where we were.
Yeah, I was saying 13, no changes, 14, you're correct.
Okay.
That is a section that I wanted to highlight. This is,
Yeah.
so we locally have adopted this as an amendment to these codes, and items 1 through 4 are, they're not a change here because they've been in place. And they've been probably a point of
Contention.
conversation. Yeah, sure. Argument.
Conversation.
There's some interpretation there. There's some, what was the intent of it? What I can tell you is our understanding of the intent, because again, this predates, I think, anybody that's at the town at this point, was a way to manage and discourage conversion of space below flood. We do have especially in this community, it happens everywhere, but in this community specifically because of real estate and opportunity, conversions of space below flood, which is only supposed to be storage, parking, and access, and conversion of those to units, which become rentable units, which become revenue for people, which are not allowed and they're unpermitted. It was a way to kind of manage that. We're open to that conversation, what this is, but I think you all know that the more likely when you drive, or even down a canal, and you go boating down a canal and you see a house with double French doors and glass, it's not just for their storage of their, of their extra household
I do not know
items.
anybody who has a property like that whose space that is storage. I don't know a single person.
Right, so storage,
And-
parking, and access is all you're supposed to use below there.
Jane and I have historically disagreed on this forever, since the beginning of when this was first discussed 100 million years ago.
Right.
And honestly, I think that right now we have a really good vision of what happens to that movable downstairs construction, that great. So right now you drive down the boulevard and 9 out of 10 of the houses on the beachfront or whatnot that are still standing, their bottom construction is not there. So it's open. You know, me as a view person likes that. But what I think about most of all is that all of that debris became a liability for every property other than the property it belonged to, because it went someplace. And I do not agree at all that 100% of the downstairs area should be able to be enclosed.
Well, right, so that's a policy decision. I know, but also remember, it's not just the beach side, it's the interior of the island, the A zones.
I get it.
Because again, those aren't breakaway walls. Those are, you can complete those without being breakaway. Whereas the V zone, you have to have breakaway. In theory, that's safer. It breaks up. It's less
I understand.
mass.
I get it, but it also becomes what hits somebody else.
Right.
And I think, you just hold on now.
So the point of, so
I
again,
know what you're gonna
the
say.
point of this is to, when you do enclose, is to discourage alternate use of it that's not allowed.
And that also.
Right.
But we have had discussions on this board about, I can, you know, my hurricane brain sometimes forgets things completely, but I have a vivid recollection of Sarah talking about what is the magic number for enclosure? Is it, you know, to park 2 vehicles? Is it 100%? Is it 50% of the square footage of the lot? Did we not have this discussion? Is this my fake memory? It could be my.
We have
Jane,
not had
go
that
ahead.
discussion recently.
We have not?
Not
Have we had
recently.
it did this just happen in my fantasy brain?
Well,
This-
you've
this
been
is-
doing this for a while on the beach, so I can certainly see where
Can I
this
get-
keeps coming up.
Can I get clarification on what so you are not for kind of breakaway walls because they become,
It's not that I'm not for breakaway walls. I don't believe that if this is your box,
yeah,
I don't believe that, and this part here is theoretically, ideally would be open. I don't believe you should be able to enclose 100% of that space.
okay.
Go ahead, Jane.
Just there's layers here, right? There's
layers.
the big picture concept of enclosure, not enclosure, and I believe some of the feedback from town council, LPA members, community, where they stand on that is partly dealing with non-floodplain management issues. So it's views, right? I think your thing is views, and from a floodplain management perspective, less enclosures obviously help reduce the amount of other uses that are below there. So eventually, whatever you decide, we'll have to decide what tools do we have to manage that, if at all, if you do allow the enclosure. That's just a really important part to tie those together.
Well, and I disagree with Anita. I do believe that a person who is building a house should have the right to decide what kind of storage or parking they want. And yes, in the 100-year storm, the perfect storm that hit us, they did lose a lot of those underbuilding spaces. But in the other 5 hurricanes that I've lived through on this island that didn't lose their downstairs storage area, all their jet skis, their cars, their bikes, their crap, family items stuck underneath their house and secured were not all over the neighborhood and blowing down the street. It had a logical place for them, and they were enclosed so we didn't have to look at all that stuff. I don't want to look at other people's stuff. I want them in their garage, and I want things to be clean. That's the one thing after Hurricane Charlie, all the junk that was outside was gone, and it just looked clean here. And that's because people put things in their garage from then on because they knew that they could blow away. And I think that people have valuable cars. If you're on the salt, if you're on an island, everything that has metal or anything to it is going to rust. It's better protected and put away instead of just open and visual. And the visual thing, Anita, is not going to be granted by having everything open. They can enclose it with shrubberies and landscaping and just have their skinny little driveway to get in so that they have privacy. People want privacy.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to be able to see them out on their beach or in their backyards on canals.
30 years I've listened
Just
to
a
that.
thought.
Yeah, sorry, Anita.
You're going to believe with her. I get it.
I'm for
I get it.
garages. I'm for if it's back to the lots, the setback. I think if someone owns a piece of property, if they're building a home, they ought to be able to build what they want. I'll go one step further and say, I understand not air conditioned, but an air conditioned garage, a concrete, which these are all concrete boxes, with a mini split or something, is actually just good just good moisture control.
I agree.
And I just think
100%.
if people, it's their risk, right? It's their risk. They'll lose it or whatever in a flood. But at the end of I understand you don't want finished space, but I don't know that.
I just want to, it is, but you got to remember everything under the FEMA kind of criteria is about, it's not about risk, it's about insurance. It's about what do we as insurance payers have to pay to recover somebody's lost stuff. That's ultimately what all of this is about,
Yeah,
what health, life, and insurance.
If it was air-conditioned storage, that would be a issue for FEMA? If it
Yeah,
really,
so, right, because you can't have electrical, plumbing, extra additional things that are giving access below flood. We allow outlets generally are above the base flood. You're allowed to have, I believe, a switch at the bottom of the stairs. That's the minimum necessary to meet building code for accessibility, because you got to be able to have a light to go downstairs. But other than that, it's very, very minimal. We have people asking all the time, outlets, 6 inches from the ceiling of the underneath part. How do I?
But the
how do I do that?
ridiculousness of this, and I agree with you. If you're going to allow it, one of those split things would be perfect, and obviously for humidity.
There are a lot of them
especially
around, right?
Absolutely, I agree. But the enforcement of this has always been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
So number 4, when you're having a property owner sign, a declaration that, yes, I agree, this is what this is for, it shouldn't just be that property owner, it should be with the property. So if Jane owns the house and she's going to enclose it and have all of her collectible cars and her, all of her jet skis and all the stuff that she has that she wants to keep enclosed, and so nobody has to look at it, if that's what she's going to do, it shouldn't be Jane. It should be her address that is assigned this.
Yeah, so it gets recorded. So in theory, if somebody does title search and all that, it should come up,
Okay,
and they should
so-
know. Everybody, listen. Anything that's been done in the last 15 years, everybody knows. That's part of our building permitting process, that they
Okay.
get
All right.
signed and they
That
get
just
recorded.
wasn't clear to me.
There are additional points in CRS for taking that enforcement steps further, which I've been here a little bit. I don't think this town wants to do those additional steps and give the enforcement opportunity to have more enforcement. You do get points for that, all the way up to we have right of access, essentially, to investigate. I don't think there's a flavor for that, but there's tools. It's just a choice locally of what you want to, what do you want to do?
Yeah, and I agree. It's hard to enforce, and it hasn't been enforced, and probably nobody really wants to enforce it. And then I jump to, why have a rule if we're not going to enforce it, right? Like, make a rule, enforce it, or don't.
Anita, unfortunately,
I'm out of here.
No, but I think the context.
I support enclosed space, and generally speaking, I'm a big proponent of, as local government, if there are state and federal rules in place, there is no need for us to take on any additional liability and additional red tape to go above and beyond those state and federal rules. So,
I admire you all. I really like you all, but I think you're wrong on this, and I'll just let it go and we'll move on.
want to take a vote on this?
We're willing to be wrong. That's fine in your eyes.
We can do a vote.
Anita, remember, we do have provisions in the Land Development Code related to height and enclosures that reward people for choosing reduction in the amount of enclosure below. We did that a couple years ago
Yeah.
as far as additional stories and height. So we have implemented some options for people, I think, according to Patrick's point of if they want to choose to do that.
But I think, Jason, isn't it also, I know it's to decrease flood insurance, but at the end of the day, if I have an enclosed space under my concrete enclosed space and I put a mini split in there for, moisture control or whatever, and I have classic cars, if I have whatever I have down there, I'm taking that risk. I don't care I really don't care if I can't be insured down there.
If you want to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, we have to implement the minimum standards, which is All that electrical, we can't permit it. Now, can you do it without a permit? Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Right. Yeah, no, but I'm
So-
just saying, no, I guess, I mean, if you have a real high structure, I mean, now, in some places, you're gonna have 20 feet off the ground. You know, your base flood elevation in, like we were talking about, in a VE12 is 13, right? You could put a mini split at 13 feet.
So I will always say not all additional requirements are bad, because sometimes they can open opportunities for other things if people really
Yeah.
thought all that out. I'll just say that.
Okay.
But the main point is, I don't want to get off of this, is that section. The real question here, well, you've answered the big picture question. I think at least the four of you have kind of given some input on that. But this language, do we want to regulate the amount of doors and windows? Do we want to use that as a tool to discourage the conversion? That's what this in theory does. Ultimately, I mean, Chris and I have talked back and forth about this. There's a couple choices of wording here that we maybe would like to change, such as per side versus per wall under number 3. We haven't made the change because, again, it's a point of contention with everybody. With modern architectural and designs, you get changes in your wall, so what does that actually mean if it's per wall? But if per side might be more beneficial, but that was more restrictive, so we don't want to go that way yet.
I actually like having the windows or
Light.
fenestration at the bottom, because architecturally it's a lot more attractive, a lot more interesting than just, straight walls. And I've even seen people put shutters without a window behind it just to give it that look. So I think architecturally it's important to
I
have some
agree. I
flexibility.
don't think we should limit windows or doors.
If you can think of any other tools, let us know, but right now it's this double door, single door
I'm going
thing.
to agree with them from a design point of view.
Sure.
If I would rather look at a window or a shutter or something rather than a brick wall.
Okay.
Or stucco, yeah.
We will, with your approval, we're just going to make a couple small wording tweaks to that section, but leave it essentially, well, maybe increase, add the windows component of it so it's understood that there's for architectural reasons.
Just
Okay.
a quick little question with regards to internal consistency. If we have language that says you can only do this downstairs, and you've got a house right now that had an apartment, can demonstrate that they're below the 50% threshold, want to rebuild their apartment, that create an internal inconsistency?
Say that again.
So we're saying anything downstairs can only be parking storage, pretty much. Someone's got an apartment that got blown out, they can demonstrate that they can rebuild the apartment under the 50% threshold.
Okay.
So that's a different use. So does that create an internal consistency in our LDC by having that?
No, so just remember that 50% applies to the entire structure. So I don't want people confusing units. So
Yeah.
if you had a legal second unit and it was below flood and there's storm damage, it's not just that unit 50% and then your upstairs unit is a different 50%. It's all 50% because it's a pre-firm structure.
Yeah.
And the reason why we use the term pre-firm, because it's prior to the adoption of the flood insurance rate maps. So once those were adopted, especially 84 is a good measure from when those first maps were implemented here. It was pre-firm, pre that map, and it was a legal second unit, then you would fall under the 50%, but you're kind of grandfathered in, so to speak. There shouldn't be any second units after that
Yeah. So
for both zoning and for flood reasons.
Okay. So there's no need to put a caveat in here or?
No, that's already covered under
Got it.
pre-firm opportunity.
Okay, shall we move on? So we'll go to page 15.
Oh, did you
Or
have-
did you have something else on page 14?
No, it's just if you had any changes to that 322.1.12, that 1 through 4, like I said, the
No,
only...
I think it's just going to be important to highlight to the council when they receive this, the discussion on the temperature-controlled issue
Okay.
Thank you.
and I'm going to call it design standard
Design
of
standard. Windows and doors.
windows and doors,
So
even if they're false.
So I'm getting the feeling of be a little more flexible, but we just, as long as we're hammering home it's
Yes.
not for conversion to...
It is not for conversion to living space, no.
Correct. Not conversion to living space, yeah. Just Same exact purpose, storage and parking.
You know what, then the conversation starts, well, okay, it's not for living space, is it for cabana space? So this is my cabana.
Well, so,
You know, but-
Anita,
but-
so this is what we get.
Oh, believe me, I know.
You have a violation, I can
know.
see in the unit, you have a bed, dresser, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm
You have a sectional
storing,
and a big screen TV
I'm
and a
storing those
refrigerator.
items
Yeah,
that happen to be set up like a
I know.
bedroom.
No pillows. Can't have any pillows on it if you're storing it there.
And that's,
Well, the other thing that it does do is it does, like, after, I was helping my neighbor who wasn't on the island. She has a big, tall, solid bottom that you couldn't go in the garage and get from one end to the other because you couldn't see. You had to have flashlights, everything. If you have at least windows that you can have natural light and open, you can dry things out, things can get a breeze. It does help with a lot of things with the moisture problems here.
and I don't want to say this is the only tool. There are other regulations that limit how much breaking up of the space that you can do. So, for example, you can't create 4 storage units, right? You can't create, you can separate parking from storage and
Chemicals
access.
can be separated.
I'm sorry?
Chemicals can be in one room, anything flammable in one room, and then you can
No,
have
the
storage.
way it works is you can separate parking from storage and access.
Right.
But your storage can't be broken up into multiple storage. So, and I think, Doug, to your point, there's so much square footage under these homes. That's where the itch comes in of, let's convert this. It's all this unused space. I don't need 1,800 square feet of storage.
Right.
But that's
I
what
would
it's supposed to be
love it.
used for. So there are some tools that it doesn't turn into bedrooms, doesn't turn into multiple units, at least on the permitting side.
So Jason, I've got 2 versions here because we had the initial version for the last meeting. I've got a bunch of notes on there, and I'm trying to follow the other version. So in the last version, around the same section, we went into stem walls and foundations. Are we going to talk about that a little later in the new version? Or
And you're on 15?
It's on foundations, it's R322.3.3.
Yeah, and then there's 1612.4.3.
Yeah, so anything related to coastal A and stem walls can be modified based on that discussion of coastal A.
14, 15.
Which one? So there, like, for example, on page 15 of 58, there's an exception, and it's reserved.
It's reserved to include an exception.
Right. So
Okay.
later on, you can correct.
Okay.
So we can discuss it when we get there. I'm okay. I just wanted to have that discussion about stem walls and foundations. But going back to where we are related to R322.1.12, accessory structures. Is that consistent with Florida Building Code, the language we've got in there? Because I'm thinking.
So that's right. So we struck that because a couple reasons, because of the dollar amounts and all that weren't were not consistent with the minimum standards. We do have a provision later on that talks about accessory structures and allows a limited structure.
Okay.
So the 10% and the 17,000 was not consistent really with the guidance and the language.
And my question is related to the use for accessory structures. So we say parking and storage. If I enclose my pool mechanicals in the structure,
I'm sorry, your pool?
my pool mechanical within the structure,
Shed?
shed, basically, is that storage?
Yes.
Or if I have a cheeky hut, that's a structure.
If you have, I'm sorry.
A cheeky hut.
Oh, the chicken.
So, yeah, cheeky hut. So we're saying the only structures you can have, the only accessory structures you can have are parking and storage.
So even parking wouldn't, well, why don't we get to that language? It's another section that we've moved it to that defines what that accessory structure would be related to the V zones. Because the A zones have a different accessory structure component to it. A zones, you can have garages, you can have sheds, you can have, as long as they're
Coastal A, though.
As long as they're flood resilient, have flood vents, blah, blah, blah. Yep.
Okay.
V zones have a different requirement, and we have to actually adopt standards for accessory structures in V zones if we're going to allow them. and then you have to define it, and it has to be essentially disposable, flood resilient, which those two things always confuse me. You're going to spend the extra money for flood resilient, but then it's got to be disposable, and then you have to set essentially a size, and it's got to be low cost. So this, when we had this 10% and 17,000, it was way above and beyond what you typically see.
So where I'm still confused though, we're talking about V zones, and I think we're lumping in coastal A to V zones now.
Okay.
And my understanding is we have the option of doing that, or we have the option of coastal A retaining A zone construction methods and requirements. Is that correct?
Correct. Stem wall, backfill, slab on, that, yes.
Okay.
That is an option under the building code, correct.
Okay. And I think I've expressed it already. I'm looking to you guys to convince me otherwise, because
Okay.
right now I look at it as that's optional, it's above.
So
and
right
beyond.
now, I don't believe the way this is drafted, the accessory structure issue has any bearing on the coastal A versus A.
Okay.
If that's what you're asking as far as V-zone standards, it was only for the primary structure and the elevation. The V-zone accessory structure has to have it specifically designed or defined of what's allowed, whereas the A-zone and the coastal A-zone maintain their A-zone rights for accessory structures. That's my understanding. I think the only thing we've addressed as a higher standard is the stem wall, backfill, and the elevation component of the primary structure.
Okay.
Do you know how I feel now? All right, so should we, are you good with this for the moment?
I am good with this.
Okay.
So, and just the 10%
I get it.
was out there, and if you have $1 million house
Yep,
in a V-zone,
yep.
do the math. It's a really big accessory structure.
Yeah, nice shed.
It's a heck of a shed. Yeah. Okay, so Jason, page 15, comments or
Yes.
comments from anybody?
So again,
on
that
page 15?
I'll put a note here, but that in the top section, there's that exception reserved. Again, that has to do with stem walls and backfill that we can come back to related to the coastal A. So that would potentially modify depending on the decision.
Yeah, so what I've heard, Jason, in talking to some engineers that specialize in this is stem wall backfill construction, when done according to Florida Building Code, is appropriate. And
Is appropriate.
is appropriate. And I don't know if we've done an inventory on this beach, but it would be interesting to see that homes in the coastal A zone that were built in the last 5 years, for example, are they still standing? And I bet you a bunch of them might have used that construction method. So to me, if we demonstrate that those houses are still standing, then it's a valid construction method that Florida Building Code's right on. They're standing. If you come back to us and you say half of them are gone, I would agree completely. We want to reevaluate this stem wall construction. What I've been told is what we need to do is as a town, we need to ensure that ASCE requirements have to be part of the plan set. They have to do an analysis with regards to potential scouring, that type of stuff. A lot of communities don't ask for that detailed information, and the suggestion I was given is keep the standard as it is, just make sure that your application forms require that from the engineer, and the engineer's going to have to demonstrate that the structure meets all those requirements.
So, yeah, I believe all that's baked into the building code and these other documents. So the way I think the question you asked about V-zone and A-zone. So again, most of the coastal A's now were V-zone. So if you did that analysis, you're going to see, yes, they survived better because they were built to a higher standard, because they were built to the V-zone standard. There are some areas that you're referring to, I think, that were A's, and now maybe some coastal A's. I think what you're going to see the difference in, if we really did a true analysis of the storm, is less wave height in those areas that are coastal A. They originally were thought of not to have wave. They probably had some wave. There's probably some damage, but not as much, because it's not a V-zone, right? It's still, even though you went from an A to a coastal A, it still isn't as bad as the V-zone, right? So the impact shouldn't have been as bad. The other reason why the idea behind that was when you do that block, when you do that solid structure without the ability of water to pass underneath, that creates push off of waves and waters that potentially have damage on other structures. that's the main priority reason why allow that, why allow the additional structures, the additional solid part of it to be able to push water and divert water to other structures, because that's what we were seeing. Water diversion and other structures banging into existing structures that damage them. So, you know, it's honestly, it's the opposite of what we're going to have a conversation about the commercial side. But again, it was trying to minimize the number of structures that were that solid foundation that could create changes to the floodwaters and affect other structures.
Yeah. But do you understand my point as a group, as staff?
Right.
That in my mind, if we're going to adopt any higher standards, it's got to be backed up by data analysis. You know?
So,
and unless we do that, we open ourselves up for a lawsuit, and we haven't demonstrated it.
well, I don't agree with that simply because FEMA and those regulations are codified in the CFR and all that. But to your point, ASCE and those 24 and 8 and all those manuals that guide and are supplement to the building codes, they tell you how to design structures, how to design wave loads, but then the policies say you can't do it. V-zone's the same way. You can design structures to withstand below flood in a V-zone. We just can't build them because of the policy, because of the insurance policy. So I understand there's the engineering. With enough money, you can engineer anything. It comes down to insurance and risk. And so what that portion doesn't take into account is what are the changes to those floodwaters and what are the impacts. So that's what we were trying to weigh. If the risk tolerance of we don't think it's that much, then we can change it. That's fine. It's a choice.
And I think where I'm getting a little hung up here is this idea of a lot of those places we're talking about were V zones, because again, in looking at some of the basic maps, I'm seeing a lot of new coastal A zones. So now we're imposing a different standard to all those existing properties. So that it's the coastal A zone that's really the concern to me, not the V zone.
Right. But my point is the design standards that you mentioned are the same, right? So the engineering is out there. How do you design to withstand this action? And we're not allowed to use it in the V zone. But we are allowed to use it in between step of the coastal A when there's still waves. So the question was, well, how do we create a standard that is, one, safer? Again, it's getting people back in their homes sooner, and I understand you can engineer it, but it was also the disbursement of waves. When you have a solid structure, the point of elevating, right, and I think to your point, Anita, it's not just a visibility thing, it's not just air and light, it is reducing damage, it is reducing the amount of water that gets shifted and changed in splashes on a neighbor's house versus going under your house. That's all part of the concept of elevating the homes. So that's where that came from, is essentially we had a choice between, so you have a choice in commercial too, okay? Do you allow commercial at grade or require the elevation? So our thought was residential can get back in, it's harder to it's cheaper to elevate and get back into your house, and in theory have less damage than a commercial structure. But we wanted the commercial uses to be able to have street access. So that's why we had that trade-off. So when I say, protecting the residential from each other, we do recognize that then we're also allowing commercial at grade that could do the same thing, but it was kind of a trade-off. So if you want to allow both, that's fine. It's either way. It's a choice.
Okay.
That's honestly that's the justification. It was an idea to further protect the residences, because allow people to hopefully get back in quicker if it does even a week sooner than somebody that was below.
I think you two could debate this for 7 or 8 days straight.
Yeah. I guess
it's a choice.
The
whatever
last
you want to
question,
do.
I think I understand this. I think I read it right, but if I'm in coastal A, the standards that you're recommending doesn't necessarily require that I use pilings. Is that correct? I could still do a pier with a footing, or would I have to go?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so.
And the reason is, if you think of existing structures that are still standing, that people might have to lift, if you need to start doing pilings, that means you have to move the structure, put it back, because you're doing different construction methods, and that's just, just crazy additional costs.
Okay. And part of this is also, honestly, born out of most of the construction techniques, I think I can say most, are the pilings, are these, they're not stone walls. And most of the people are realizing they can, even in the middle of the island, they can create storage and parking. They can reduce the amount of parking and all that they have in their property, on their yard, get a bigger yard, and park everything under the building by having that type of construction rather than a stem wall, which obviously is used with fill and slab. So it creates more space for them. So we're seeing that shift substantially to that type of construction. It's already elevated, it's already pilings. What was the difference, frankly? Now, whether you believe in that's a justification, that's up to you guys. Yeah.
Okay, Jason.
All right.
All right, the next section we're going to talk about is trash containers. That's
is
the
it?
next new section, which is page 15, still on 15.
Yeah, so 15 is,
Anybody have any commentary on that? That thought that was pretty straightforward. Okay. So 16, anything here, Jason?
yep. So again, everything stricken here is in theory
straightforward.
part of building code and not necessary. Try to shorten this 50 pages up by a few. if
Okay,
we
so
can.
what page do you want to shift us to? Because the next thing I have is,
The rest of it's licensing, and again, some of this we included specifically just because I wanted you to have the whole section.
exactly.
Versus sometimes we'll do part of a section and then you ask, well, what's on the next page? So that was just giving you the whole thing. So as far as we're concerned, that was it for changes to there. There'll probably be some cleanup at a later date of some of the licensing stuff as that changes, but it wasn't impactful to our discussion today.
Can I just bring up another issue on the previous version?
Yes.
So on that version, there was discussion of historic buildings.
I'm sorry, is what?
There was discussion with regards to historic buildings. So, and there was some strike-throughs in there associated with that. I don't know if you guys are looking at that still. Just keep in mind that the beach school is a historic building.
Okay.
Part of
That's
it is.
probably why we're going to have a school that stays on this island.
Okay.
Because the district had to deal with that registered building.
Oh, it's right. I didn't know it was registered.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's been a great benefit, I think, to the community to have that historic status. And I think that any language that we have in our code that protects and makes exceptions for those historic buildings, we need to keep.
I agree.
Can I just real quick say, because we're at a middle point here, what you said earlier, this is really boring to people watching, but we have to do this because if we don't do this, it's all big picture conversation
Right.
and the nuances in the language. And so
Right.
without this step, we don't get to language that we can implement. So I apologize to everybody how boring it is. but we have to do this.
I just, I think that it's just always important for us, because we're talking in acronyms and whatever else, it's important for us to make it relative for somebody who, maybe this lady who's sitting over here, maybe she doesn't have a clue what CRS or LMNOP is. So it's just important to make it relative
That's
for
true.
people who aren't in the bubble, you know?
Yeah, that's a great
Okay.
point.
Who are the majority of people that this will impact. So,
And it's a bad
Jane,
habit.
did you
So
have
if
something?
we say acronyms, let us know and we can.
Yeah, I
correct
will,
that.
don't worry. No, we were.
Did you have something?
I landed there, but just, does somebody have something before page 21? Or Jason, did you want to go, what page do you want to go to?
I was ready to go to Exhibit B, unless you had something else.
Jane?
Is it 21 of 58 or 20?
21 of 58.
21 of 58.
Okay.
I don't understand why we stipulate that an owner who is an owner builder cannot sell, lease his property, because a person that has a contractor can sell and lease the property as soon as the permit is closed. Why are we, I mean, things come up in people's life. Sometimes they have to go take care of a loved one, they have a death in the family, someone dies. You know, it just seems like a big restriction to put on somebody who wants to be the owner builder.
State law.
Oh, well, can we change that?
No, Jane, you're going to have to live
You
with
can go to
that.
Tallahassee, Jane.
But there are exceptions, I assume. I mean, if somebody dies, you got to sell it. You don't just leave it there.
Okay. John?
I mean, I could provide you with a link to the state statute. You can
No.
read it yourself. My recollection, there's no exemptions.
So if somebody dies, they have to leave the house empty for the interior till the year is over, and then they can sell it.
Again, Ms. Plummer, I'm
Ridiculous.
telling you that I'll provide you with a link to the statute. I don't believe there are any exemptions.
See about that.
Okay. Justin, where would you like to move to next?
Does anybody else? Exhibit B, which was 2758, unless you have anything else.
Any of the members have anything before that? Don, Patrick?
Give Patrick
No?
time to check
Okay.
his versions.
Go on to.
Go on to what?
Sorry, Patrick. I know.
We're going to page 27 of 58, Jane. Unless you have something prior.
I'd never heard that in the EC zoning district, that they are only allowed not to make repairs over 25%.
Correct. That is
page are we on?
because, yeah, what page is that?
What page?
Page 25 of 58,
Okay.
at the bottom, under B1.
That was a change in 2000.
Wow.
Because there was no, because the EC zoning district doesn't allow homes, doesn't allow commercial structures, and the town council adopted regulations that reduced and changed the uses that were permitted, shifted a couple to special exception, and eliminated some uses. So what we realized during that time is that there was no definition of when a legal non-conforming structure becomes something that has to be moved back behind the line, essentially. And so, because it's not allowed in the zoning at some point, and so that's what the council chose, is to choose the 25% threshold.
Okay. Just never heard 25% on anything.
We didn't have a definition, it just it talked about damage, and so there was no definition of when or
So
how,
is this new?
since 2000.
Oh, okay.
Okay, moving on to page 27 of 58, Exhibit B. Jason?
So this is as you can see by Article 4, floodplain regulations. We do change on 29 of 58, change the date, obviously. We struck the address of town hall, so that wherever town hall is, that's where those maps will be. Some of this is just standard language that we have to have in the ordinance, saying that we will hold on to the maps and keep copies and all that stuff. There's some amendments on page 31 of 58, which changes the section 6424, substantial improvement, substantial damage.
Jason, before we go to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just one page, on page 29 and 58, can you just explain what the flood insurance study, and it looks like it was done post-hurricane, what that study is?
So the
In
flood,
section 614,
Six-
6413?
Yeah.
Yep.
614, right. So
6413, yeah.
there's two acronyms, right? The flood insurance study, or FIS, is the data and analysis that goes behind the flood insurance rate maps that FEMA and their partners produce.
Okay.
And those are, I forget when they were delivered, but months ago. And then the maps became effective November 17th. So that product, which you can find online under FEMA, and people can order.
So that's the effective date, but the study's been going on for years, basically.
Correct. So it was part
So it's
of.
not a new study, it's...
No,
it's a
I'm sorry,
study.
yes. So that, I don't know that there was any changes to that study in the last year and a half, frankly.
Got it.
I would say it probably started 5 years ago, maybe longer.
Got it.
There's probably a term that people might, risk map might be a term people are familiar. That was the coastal study that FEMA was doing all over the country, and it was required by law for them to do, and so it's been years of implementing that. So, yes, so
Okay.
that's the dates of those.
Okay.
it.
Jason, page 31? Did you have something there?
Yeah, there's some language being stricken to clean up, I believe, subsection 3 of 6424. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Anybody have any questions there?
So that's essentially cleaning up substantial damage language that was kind of hanging out there that we're eliminating.
Okay. 29, there's no changes? I mean, 32 of 58?
No proposed changes to that. Those are mostly duties of the floodplain administrator. They haven't really changed. Right, Kristen? Just broaden every day. Nothing on 30 for changes. 31 is basically connecting floodplain management to the building codes, and we do have to comply with the building codes. 32 is very similar to building code references and other state laws as far as when permits are expire. Remember, so most people think of permits in a building permit, and there's Florida building codes that require certain criteria, but there's also work done in a special flood hazard area, which is our entire island. A and V requires permits for most work. So even if, for the most part, under most circumstances, if it doesn't require a building permit, it still could require a flood permit. So that's why some of this repeats. You'll see the 180-day thing because it's applicable to the flood permit. Building code already covers their section, if that makes sense. So, Division 5 is adding the coastal A zones.
Yeah, that's page 36, is that it?
Page 36 of 58, correct?
Yep.
36 and 58, coastal.
Because we have coastal A's now, so it adds the reference to it.
Do you want to stop there, Patrick?
No, I think I've made it clear, so
Yep.
all those coastal A zones I've got highlighted in red on my document.
In red.
In red.
Holy moly. Moved from yellow to
So
red.
that is an adding the reference because we have one.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Okay.
change the policy, which is essentially for the public, that subsection 2 is a reference to our local 1978 coastal construction line. It's somewhat redundant because we have an EC zoning district that matches that line, but it's just making sure it's keeping the reference to that line since a lot of people know the 78 line versus the EC reference.
Okay.
Again, on page 37 of 58 is adding the reference to coastal A because now we have coastal A's.
Right.
Do we have incidences of sand dunes and mangroves within coastal A zones?
It would be,
Sand dunes, maybe sand dunes. Kristen, go ahead.
On the bay side of the island, there's some mangroves because the coastal A zone goes like this, kind of, and then the sand dunes we have.
So yes.
We do? Okay.
Thank you, Kristen. Jane?
My question is on section 6-465. Why do we wait for the final inspection to certify the elevation of the lowest level? It seems like that's after the fact. Why, when the lowest level is built, it should be inspected at that point, elevation checked at that point, not when the whole thing's done.
we do, but there's other things that are inspected. Flood vents, which has to require inspection. Finished grades are required to be on the elevation certificate. So you can't submit and under CFR of the federal law, you're supposed to submit your final EC at when construction's complete. Because you put finished grade, highest adjacent grade, lowest adjacent grade.
So at some point prior to the thing being done, the elevation is checked and it shouldn't be an issue at the final.
Right, so there's a building under construction part, EC. There's permitting, under construction, and final. We generally don't require the EC for permitting because your permit plans are supposed to show compliance with that. And then under construction is either the tie beam or other structural component. Before you go higher and finish that, you should be doing the EC to confirm compliance with elevation. And then your final EC is all the other stuff.
Okay.
In a lot of cases with this construction on this island, you don't have flood vents in yet, so that has to be part of the EC, the elevation certificate. And we
Okay.
can't finalize the permit until all of that is in.
I'm just checking height. I mean, I just don't want that to be left.
So the elevation certificate, thank you, Anita, is
That's
a
okay.
critical component to floodplain management and whether we are doing a good job of administrating the rules and regulations, both our own and state and federal. So that is one of the things that gets checked. Are they annually now, right? Every 5 years we have this wonderful visit, and I think they're
We
checking them
submit
in.
them manually.
Yeah, we sit them manually. We get graded on how accurate and how well they're done, and then that's part of our score. It's part of the CRS, community rating system. So I would say ECs are probably, elevation certificates are one of the most critical parts to get correct.
Okay. We're on page 38. Are there any other questions? I just wanted to mention the manufactured home section. That's going to include, because I know there's this trend of these modular homes that are going to be elevated. What is that included in this section? I would assume it is, or is that a new thing?
Yeah, I get confused. There's state definitions and all kinds of stuff, like modular, manufactured, whatever. But if it meets wind codes, if it meets building code, and elevated, that can be meet the code.
A lot of stuff on that.
Yeah, there's at the state level, there's definitions, and I think we just stick with whatever the state says. But typically, modular meets modern day building code. It's the exact same construction, but built in a factory and put on your site. Manufactured homes have different standards.
Okay.
So
So a
can we-
modular home technically is supposed to meet all building code, Florida building code requirements.
Would that be important to include it somewhere in here?
So mobile home, which is the mobile home term, isn't
Yeah,
really
mobile manufactured modular.
mobile home is kind of went away in the 70s, but we all still use it. That, by zoning, is very limited where on the island it can be done, and there's the provisions of flood. And obviously, there's a couple areas that you're familiar with. They can replace there by zoning. They just have to elevate to meet flood regulations.
Right.
And the reality of that, based on lot size and accessibility, is very low. So, but that's why also built into that zoning code is they have alternative uses that they can look at for that.
So the modular homes that meet all the building codes could be used on a vacant lot
They're a
on this
house.
island anywhere.
Anything that meets Florida building code.
Yep.
Wow, that can be huge in getting people back in their houses quicker. I mean, there's amazing products out there
Well,
We don't.
that are just fabulous.
Just a little FYI, I research them extensively. Most of the time, it's same price, if not more, than stick-built construction. So I don't know if it'll become an extensive preference
Yeah,
for a lot of people.
it sounds like, ooh, but I agree with
Well,
Patrick.
but in place of mobile homes, if the mobile home parks could go to those standards and have modular homes as opposed to mobile homes, they
But
would
they're
be
still-
much
but they're still-
sexually.
They're
Yep.
still elevated, and the mobile home areas are smaller lots. It's accessibility and other things
Yeah,
that
but they
are
have
restricted.
all different
And you know
styles.
what? The only place is the red coconut, and I think we just need to stop talking about it because it's not going to happen. I mean, oh my God, did I get a lot of flack for saying that? But the reality of it. So I think it's important for us as policymakers and the council to start talking about the reality of Fort Myers Beach right now. And the reality is the red coconut, 99% chance is not going to exist again.
Right.
And it's in its former version. So just because we have a section here that says manufactured homes and it says we could have them. Well, it says you could have them, but with all these elements to it, it's just, and once you start talking about the value of the land and everything that would have to be done, it just, economics will drive that, and it drove the red coconut and that type of housing off
So
the island.
the big change that was coming in this is related to that, but it had nothing to do with flood. It had to
Sure.
do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, but that provision was already in there. Once you have flood damage, mobile homes and all that, then they were supposed to be replaced and had to be elevated. There was a provision that used to allow remodel and repair and other things under 50% and to stay in place. All of that was going away. It was going to be, once you replace, it has to be elevated.
Right.
So we were going down that path already, and it's just been accelerated because of the storm.
It's
But
just
the
there's
storm
so
part,
many people that are so sad about that.
There was no
And Gulf
exceptions.
Colony,
Yep.
I mean, it's a big life change.
it is. There was no exceptions for flood.
Yep.
There was an exception for other repairs and
Yeah.
damage. That was going away anyways, and that was again, I mentioned a requirement to be able to get, as part of the program essentially, I think it was an 8 or a 9. Like if we didn't choose not to do that, then we go all the way back down to an 8 or a 9 automatically.
Kristen, you have something to add to that?
For us to move from a 9 to an 8, that's where
That's what it
the
was.
requirement was.
Okay.
So
Okay, anybody else?
And just something that I just learned as we were talking today, and I caught on, just if anybody's listening, the rating system is 1 being the best,
Yes.
10 being the worst. Not,
Good
so I think
Oh, not
at
the
some
opposite.
point,
That's good.
At some point, I was asking the question of, can we go from a 5 to a 6? What I really meant is, can we go to 5 to a 4?
5 to a 4.
So
Correct, yes.
I
That's true. So yeah, the lower the number, the better.
got it.
There's not a lot of communities past 5. I mean, 5 is a pretty darn good number. So,
Okay, Jason,
Where are we?
or
42.
anyone, as we move through 39, 40 of 58, 41.
we have some changes on 39. It's just adding definitions
Yeah.
that weren't there before, like coastal A zone. I did not make that definition up. That comes out of somebody else's technical definition. And then we have 40 where we're eliminating those definitions of existing manufactured home, park, and expansion, as we just mentioned and talked about.
Yep.
Some of those rules have changed, and we're changing anyways. 41, nothing there. 42 is describing whatever the limit of moderate wave action, which again is it's the coastal A boundary.
It's coastal A and accessory structure stuff.
And that defines that, when I mentioned that there's waves, there's still waves.
Hey, Jason, the definitions that we're putting in there, are they consistent with the Florida State Floodplain Management Office, kind of their communication and
Which, on 45, is that what you're
just overall definitions? They've got definitions
Yeah,
here with
they were provided by them.
The limit of moderate wave action also, they've got a definition for that.
They were provided by the State Floodplain Management Office.
And that's consistent? Okay.
So on 45, there is a change, which is probably going to be maybe a 30-minute conversation, to market value.
A change to market value. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
And
45 of 58.
so it has been advised to us in the last few weeks that FEMA has published or has draft guidance in instructing states to advise their local communities to remove the adjustment factor that's in the market value that we've had in our definition for years. And
They've advised, or
they've
they're requiring
instructed
us?
to
They've
remove it.
instructed us to.
Hiring us.
They're requiring us.
Requiring
Yeah.
So the state Did you break it, Kristen? Yes, they've said take it out. And actually, the State Floodplain Management Office mentioned that they have to now go through 485 ordinances of our communities in Florida to read and review and see how many have them in there and go back to them and say, remove this.
And is that effective immediately?
As soon as you adopt this, yes. Or as soon as it
Well,
gets
for
adopted.
God's sakes, how many people on this island are using that 20%?
They're not. They're not. Most aren't. So most, if you remember, in the last few weeks, several weeks, months, the property appraiser has published letters with many properties, especially starting with single family, that set a market value for structure and other things. That number seems to be higher in most cases than what this other number was. So that's what they can use. So we're being advised that only they, property appraiser, can set these numbers.
That's going to be very important for people to
It's
understand.
confusing.
That is hugely important.
And
for
it does
people to
affect people that don't have that letter or that established number, because I don't believe it's typically on the property appraiser website. It could be wrong, but that is, they'll have to either ask for that or hopefully, I believe he's making progress. They are making progress. I've heard some multifamily or quads or what have you have gotten these letters, but I don't know for a fact. So
I actually was texting back and forth with Mr. Caldwell about this, the discrepancy that so many properties are finding where, for example, you've got the same, almost the identical house to your neighbor. Your neighbor has one number and you have another, and they're substantially different, okay? So what I was trying to ask or trying to get at was there an appeal process where if you don't like your tax value letter, do you have some method of saying, hey, but look, my neighbor's is 300,000 and you've only got me in at 158. Why is that? And I never got the answer to that. Do you all know the answer to that?
I don't. I had a
So-
brief conversation several weeks ago, and part of it was built around we all need to be careful of how it affects our property taxes. right? There's a short game of 50%
Yeah.
rule. There's a long game of what does it do to our property taxes. So
Yeah.
I don't know the intricacies of that. It's a different agency. All I know is the method that we have been using, we're now being instructed by
Yeah.
through FEMA and the state to stop.
So his suggestion was to maybe have some sort of town hall thing where he would come, but if the answer isn't yes, there is an appeal, you're stuck with that valuation.
Yeah, I don't. We
don't know.
we have to rely
Okay.
on the property appraiser. So the irony is that most of the time those letters are showing higher values, yet we're being
Well, mine
slapped on the
certainly did.
hand
Yeah.
to eliminate the alternative, which was a lower value, but yet FEMA's worried about these high valuations. So they're forced us into waiting for those letters or using people to use those letters.
And I think it's important to clarify that there used to be 3 options to look at.
There still is 2.
There still remains 2. You can always go get your private appraisal done, and if that number is if it meets all FEMA appraisal requirements and it's above, you can use that number also. So the 20% was, for most people, was the methodology that left you with the lowest number. So in my mind,
no
it shouldn't be hurting most people. It should be
Okay.
benefiting.
Well, and to Anita, somewhat to your point, we've been asked, what if the appraisal shows less? Can we use that lower number? And I suppose, sure,
No,
if it's a
right.
recent appraisal. Because there's
No,
people,
It isn't the lower, no.
we're being asked about lower numbers.
Okay.
And it's because of 50% thresholds. If you have insurance, in many cases, people want to be over 50%, so they can trigger insurance payments for elevating. And so there's people out there trying to get an appraisal for lower than what the market value is
Oh, I
to
see.
trigger the ICC, to trigger the,
Oh, that's interesting.
yes, it's both sides. There's no, this solves all the
I
problems.
didn't think about that.
It's both sides.
Okay.
And hopefully the people have enough tools still to do what they need to do to accomplish their goals, I hope.
Yeah. Do you have
So-
something, Jane?
Okay, so only the letter is a choice
The
of
property
value.
appraiser is apparently the sole person that can decide
Or you can have
what that
an
rate is.
appraisal done, and you're saying in increasing or decreasing that number is how your insurance will be rated? I
No,
thought-
no, I said, no, separate conversation. But for our purposes of floodplain management, an appraisal, private appraisal, or
Or the tax?
dollar amounts provided by the property appraiser as market value is what determines how we do the math, or what the math is being done. Yes.
So as soon as this is adopted by the town council, that's the rule. So that's going to be the rule. So that will be, okay.
And there are no rules in how the county comes up with the value of your house. It's not square footage, it's not the way it's built, it's,
Okay, the county and the town don't have any say in that. That is the property appraiser. Lee
okay,
County-
so the property appraiser has no rules about how he comes up with this
I
value.
didn't say that.
Well, you don't
They
know
have
that.
their own
We don't know
rules.
that.
But we can't get an answer on that.
Well, we haven't got it.
They have their own rules. They have their own formulas, their own rules, their own statutes, their own everything.
Jane, I think if you sat down with Matt Codwell, and I've heard him speak at many functions, they use 3 methodologies, and they will explain to you what those are, and they do have set standards. You can always appeal it, and a lot of times people are successful because you know more about your property than they do. And it's the
thing is,
same thing.
Patrick-
It's the same thing with a private appraisal. That's what they tell you is they can go into way more detail than the property appraiser. You have more information on your side.
But the question is, what is that appeal process? I think that question's been asked, at least it's been asked to me quite a few times, and I don't know what to tell someone. What is the appeal process?
Post hurricane like this, usually it's when your trim notice comes out.
Yeah.
And you want to contest that. That's when you would put in the appeal, and they have to do it pretty quickly before they establish those new values. But after a hurricane, I don't know what that would be.
Okay. Okay.
Just to point out again, that market value definition has been adjusted based on advice from State Floodplain Management Office.
under definitions, can we go back
And
to
honestly,
the...
if we all could have been a little bit quieter about all this, maybe some of this would have, but that's okay. That's all right.
Can we go back to the accessory structure definition?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Again,
On 46?
I
Wait,
know
what
this
page
is
are you on, Patrick?
associated with that section of the code.
What page, I'm sorry?
We're talking about on page 4258,
42. Okay,
accessory structure.
yep. Section 6494.
And again, I'm concerned that we have such a limited definition of what a accessory structure is. By definition, I think a structure is anything 3 feet and above. So cheeky hut is not allowed.
Patrick, if you go to page 55 of 58,
Okay?
I hope that'll answer your question.
55,
And then that language can all be modified. And that's section 6-530, which I believe,
yeah.
which is a new section. It's all the way, it's at the back.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Yep. So that's the
That's good.
defining and replacing.
Yeah, perfect.
And again, there's a difference between non-elevated and elevated,
Okay.
obviously, for flood reasons.
All right, Jason, what page do you want to go to next?
I didn't have anything until 49 out of 58,
Yep.
which again is just adding the coastal age zones reference. 47 gets into a little bit about the manufactured homes and clarifies that language. 51 of 58, again, deletes language that's no longer relevant. 52 is just, and 53 are just coastal A's, adding the language. And just to Patrick's reference, there is a reference to ASCE 24 in here, which are, again, the technical documents that tell you how to design things. I don't think... So I think it's 55 is probably the biggest change as far as the elevated accessory structures.
And that's section 6530.
It is section 6530, correct. So 6530 was previously reserved, part of the reserved group, and now 6530 is its own section.
So that helps me from a ground level, non-elevated structure. I get it.
Again, that language can be adjusted, tweaked, but it was based on best practices that we could figure out based on looking at other ordinances. The State Floodplain Management Office has copies of all the ordinances from Florida, and their input on that also.
So if someone has a legal apartment and wants to elevate it, is that considered an accessory unit versus an accessory structure?
If they
No, so no. Accessory structure definition is incidental and subordinate to the home, the primary use, which is usually, in a case of a single family, your garage and sheds would be incidental to those. Another unit, if you have multiple units on your property, those are primary uses and principal uses. So it would not be an accessory structure. You couldn't use an accessory we use the term a lot, accessory, for both.
Yeah.
And so I get the confusion.
Accessory units for
accessory
like a
dwelling
in-law
units, it's still a principal use. It's not an accessory structure.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense.
Okay. That concludes that discussion, unless anybody has anything to add.
That was pretty quick. Are you sure?
Mr. Herron, anything?
Just need to open.
Yes, I was just talking about the discussion with us. Okay. So I'll open the public hearing. Hi, Sarah. Didn't see you come in. Have you been here the whole time? Oh, thank goodness. I'll open the public hearing, which is the public hearing specifically to what we've just discussed. Is there anybody who would like to speak? Joe, let me take the guy in back of you because he hasn't spoken yet. If you'll just state your name for the record, sir.
Yes, Brent Garrett. Are you guys going to speak about the lot sizes and having the smaller lots on the north end of the island and being able to rebuild on those lots?
I hate to tell you this, but that was not discussed in this section, but we'll address it afterwards. Thank you
We
very
can
much.
address that in the next
Yeah,
topic.
it's the next section. Thank you. Mr. Gilberti?
Hi, Joe Gilberti, 385 Denora Boulevard. I've listened to, do I get 3 minutes here?
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, all this ordinance was based on old FEMA maps. And you just
Yep.
received maps that were approved from work that was done over the past years. A hurricane hit. When a hurricane hits, the Army Corps comes in, does bathymetrics on the ocean, and all the FEMA maps change. So to adopt this ordinance would be erroneous, so I'm asking all things to be pulled back that Jason Green did, because you have no engineers doing bathymetrics with the Army Corps of Engineers running a new model with a Cat 5 or a Cat 3, whatever level of service you're doing. All these maps are going to change. So this ordinance, if I heard right, because none of us got a copy of it in the crowd here, not one person's got a copy so we could go along with you, that we were going to lose this 20% reduction. So I'm asking this whole ordinance to be removed. And I also have a question. Well, I can't ask questions, but Jason Green, I've known for 13 years, worked at DeSoto County or Mosaic Phosphate. If you guys care about people's lives, water supply, I already mentioned it before, he has an engineer.
Mr. Gilberti,
Well,
I'm going to stop you.
Well, you can't stop me. This is a
I
public
can
input.
stop you,
I'm
and I
talking
will.
about the agenda.
Mr. Gilberti, I am going to stop you. You will not make accusatory comments.
I'm not accusing
about our
him.
Mr. Gilberti, you can make comments
All
relative
right,
to
I'm
the
asking-
discussion we just
I am,
had.
all right, I'll move on. Okay, so why are we releasing money for a consultant to do an ordinance on FEMA requirements or construction cost with only the thought of the cost, not the safety of the public? We live on the beach. The beach gets hit by storm surge. It's an expensive place to live. Okay, you get destroyed when a storm surge hits. But to have an ordinance to come through without any engineers, any structural engineers, any bathymetrics, or any storm surge evaluation that's going to move the coastal construction line, affect setbacks, affect everybody, notwithstanding any of the public safety of the people, without an engineer in the room or an engineer working for the county. Now, Weiler Engineering is an engineering company, and they should know better than to come in here and start billing the city for ordinances based on an old FEMA map after a major Category 5 hurricane hit. So I'm asking for the termination of his contract. Okay, and I want to see the public records immediately from you. What's your name?
Mr. Gilberti, would you continue with your comments?
Okay, so I want to halt all ordinances to the changes that Jason Green has marked up. Why are we releasing money to Jason Green about this ordinance without the new FEMA maps and the Army Corps present here so they can bring money here to do the bathymetrics and do the model with, say, another consultant not tied to my project, the water project, which Jason's been named on it, okay, and the coastal construction line. These setbacks are serious issues for new development. These are going to affect maybe big tax bases that come in, say, on Red Coconut. I'm going to assume, since there's no trailers, they're going to put a big multi-unit complex there. Okay? They're going to be affected by this ordinance. And you're trying to tax everybody doing it in some kind of notion that you care about our cost. I care about the safety of the people. So this entire board is subject right now, not having an engineer of record coordinating with Jason Green on the ordinance.
Mr. Gilberti, your time is up.
Thank you.
Couple things just wanted to address on 322.112.2C. I'm used to reading these kind of things. The whole temperature control construction discussion you guys had.
Yes, sir.
What we've done in other jurisdictions is for obviously these elevated houses, velocity zone, A zone, coastal A zones now. As long as they're above the required elevation, I would tell you that close to 100% of the homes have some sort of temperature control or humidity control. So the loophole is if you don't allow temperature control, it will then be a humidistat put in there. And then of course everyone's gonna switch it over to a thermostat. I tell you, every home in Naples has that. Garage, temperature control. Whether you can't 100% discourage everyone from doing the downstairs. I will tell you that 12 homes are doing a barefoot beach with the breakaway walls. They're all being done correct. And you'll know what will happen 3 months from now. There's only so much you can regulate that.
Yeah.
You know, they're even have an inspector that goes out there in Collier County to make sure when you're done, you didn't finish anything out. But you cannot keep going out there like fire inspections and regulate that. So we got to be real here, you know, which gets to the next thing I was talking about, the whole windows and doors, limited openings. From an architect, just community-wise, it'd be horrible if I'm on the backside of a house on a canal looking back at someone's house and there's no windows and doors, sliding glass doors on the ground floor. I know what the intent is. I get it, but we got to be real here. It's also community-based. A house we have in Matlacha, we have 20-foot sliding glass doors, 8-foot sliding glass doors, 8-foot. It allows the house to look like a house, basically. So I would consider thinking about that. And just to support things that we're doing here, pretty much everything that's in an ordinance, 99% of that stuff is already in our Florida building code, in our Florida residential code. Coastal A zone is just a new thing that's come out. It's actually been in our code, just never existed in the FEMA map before. And just to clarify too, I think you had a question earlier about can a house be on a regular pad foundation? The answer is yes, it can. It just means it's got to be columns or piles. If you have walls, it's breakaway walls. If you have walls that can't be breakaway walls, those are your solid cast-in-place concrete walls, shear walls, because you needed it, like high-rises do. So I'm glad we're not going to the extreme level, which is requiring coastal A zones to be done exactly as velocity zones, because that means everyone would have to be on piles no matter what. But I will say that 3/4 of the properties around here, of all of our clients, are going through geotechs. They're all requiring piles because of the dirt. There's only, actually, the further away you get from the beach, the dirt gets actually worse. The dirt on the beach is actually denser, but you got to be in piles because of velocity zone. So we work with, you know, several geotech engineers, and over the years, this is what we know. There's some places where you don't until you go through a geotech process. So the whole stem wall thing is kind of irrelevant. The exception is there in our building code. Wiping it away has no relevancy in Fort Myers Beach, because a stem wall is supposed to be a stem for a floor. Your floor is going to be way up there. So that stem wall being wiped out from the code totally makes sense, because it's irrelevant. Even if you had it and left it alone, it's irrelevant, because you're not building a stem wall that's going 12 foot in the air. So what we see is velocity zone, piles, breakaway walls. Coastal A zones, piles if you need it, column supported, breakaway walls. Regular A zone, you may need piles, depending on the dirt, but those walls don't have to be breakaway. So a lot of this stuff is already standardized in our building code, AC 24, all this stuff. It's what we do all the time, have been doing. Just the coastal A zone is the newest thing that's been coming out as now officially putting into policy. So I just want to say I'm glad we're not going into what FEMA would like, is to make coastal A zones velocity zones. And something I guess we want to make sure that everyone understands too, we're keeping commercial in the coastal A zones where it can be dry flood proof, so everything can stay on the ground floor as commercial. That was my understanding. I didn't see any language that deviates from that, which is a benefit.
Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it. Is there anybody else? Yes, sir.
Dave Lay. I'd sent a email to Jane, and I think she might have copied the group a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, she did.
And this just has to do with, I intend to elevate my home. I've got an old cottage home up on Bayview Drive. The modular home thing just came up as an option. I'm not sure that's the way to go for sure, because of cost, it might be a balance. But the issue with this is that in order to meet FEMA guidelines, the preferred method in all the guidelines is to take utilities and move them above base flood elevation. Currently, or the house that still remains there, I've got the hot water heater on the ground, I've got the laundry and all of that down on the first floor. I prefer to put that upstairs, so I don't want to have to deal with this mess again. I need to put that upstairs. There is no room in the existing floor plan to do that. So what I was planning to do, I just got plans I designed prior to the change to the 10-foot setback lines on the side. So I'm requesting that you go back to the 7.5-foot setbacks on the side of the property that will allow me to build out to the setbacks so that I can hit the enough square footage to put these utilities upstairs.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stop you. That's in our next discussion, but thank you very much.
That's
we
what I
appreciate
wanna
it.
make
And
sure
thank
we
you for
cover.
your letter.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir. Jane? No. Jane, hold on. Is there any other public comment? I'm going to close the public hearing portion. Okay, Jane?
David, I did bring your email and your request to have it be put into the public record for the last meeting, and
Yes.
so I'll give that over to Jason to put that in,
Patrick?
or whoever.
Two things. One is based on stem wall comment. Just would like some clarification, so maybe Jason, if you've got the answer, or if this gentleman can come back and provide the answer. So the stem wall construction, and forgive me for not being a construction guy, I thought that could be used as a method for where you build your slab under your house. But the way it was described is it would be a construction method to bring up to 10, 11 feet up in the air. Can it be done for your slab and still use piers? And I don't know if you've got an answer to that.
I would ask if you allow him to speak a little bit more. We have the building official here might be able to address that, but I just use my own example. My house is on a stem wall backfilled with dirt, and then a slab on top of that dirt, and that elevates me above the base flood. There's a elevation point where structurally it doesn't make sense, or cost-wise probably, to have 10 feet of block to raise that slab.
And that
was kind of my point when I said middle of the island's getting to an elevation where the minimum elevation anyways is creating opportunities for more parking underneath. Why would you enclose that area and not make it usable? It's getting to a point where it becomes a garage anyway, and it opens up opportunities for people, which then switches the construction technique.
Okay. So typically it's only used to get to your base flood elevation. It's not, that construction method is not typically combined with a, you use that method to get to your slab level, and then you use columns on top of that. You don't typically combine those two methods, is that correct?
I don't believe so. I don't believe you do pilings or on top of the stem wall.
Okay, I got it. Then the other thing was, gentleman brought up issues, part of me would rather just maybe ignore those comments, but I think a lot of people listen, and some of these issues are a little complicated, and when people speak and they provide misinformation, it just confuses people.
I agree with you, Patrick.
So I think I don't know if you took mental notes, I took a few mental notes, and I think we want to maybe dispel some of these things that are not accurate. For example, it was brought up about coastal construction line shifting. Yes, that can shift, but right now our code says the 1978 coastal construction line is the one that we have to respect, and then you have to go through a DEP process if you're within the other areas. So that's one example, but there's a few things said that if you can maybe just clarify those for the public.
Sure. A couple of the items. I don't think everything needs to be addressed. The term coastal construction line, there's two of them in Fort Myers Beach. There's what's referred to a couple places in this ordinance as the 1978 coastal construction line. That is a platted, recorded line that is on public record of Lee County, that is used by this town, is the kind of the demarcation of where the EC, Environmental Conservation Zoning District, starts and ends, and then where a typical urban or developable zoning district starts. So for example, we have a lot of RC zoning, RS, downtown, lots of different zoning districts along the coast. They stop at the 78 line, and after that, Gulfside becomes EC. So we continue to use that as a reference because a lot of people understand what that 78 line is, but that's really, for us, from the zoning side, it's about the EC zoning. That's the change, and that affects use. Okay.
EC zoning is environmentally critical or environment critical zoning.
Right.
It's
limited.
Very restrictive. I keep looking at you and telling you this because you are the public to me today.
So I think the other thing was,
but there's another one, right? I think you're referring, there's a second line which is established by DEP.
Yeah.
And that is there's actually a study, and I said this last time, the flood insurance rate maps that were adopted as of November 17th and provided by FEMA mapping partners to us to adopt don't match with what DEP's, I believe it's a 1999 coastline study says.
Department of Environmental
By
Protection.
Environmental Protection, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Their
There
study.
should like be a sign
I
up
know,
here.
I
Anytime
know.
one of us says something, it just tells you
John,
what
John
it
should
is.
just slap me. By Florida law, that study supersedes the maps because they're higher. So many times you'll see developers do a individual lot property study to determine whether that Florida Department of Environmental Protection study, how accurate it is to them, or they'll utilize that study and get a decision by that department, that agency, of what their actual on-site elevations are. So recent developments have done that. They've elevated to what that agency told them they had to elevate. And it was different than what's on our maps. That'll be, and that proximate line is Estero Boulevard somewhere in the middle, or maybe on this side of Estero. Those are two different coastal construction lines for two different purposes. And it had nothing to do necessarily with A zones and V zones. There are some lines, that coastal construction line from the state agency, that crosses over from a V to an A. You're going to have areas that have both of those flood zones in their area that they require permitting. And really what that line means is you permit through us, but you also have to do a permit through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Can you also talk about the FEMA flood maps that were recently adopted, and that do we anticipate any other changes in the near term?
No, I believe that they've put a final, that's it, this is what you get. There is some examples of post-storm communities pausing, doing moratoriums, and then looking at the flood, studying the effects, what were the elevations, how does that compare to maps, and then making decisions on base flood elevation. A community can always establish and adopt a higher standard of that elevation. If the flood insurance rate map said 15, you could incorporate additional, what we call freeboard, +1, well, it's by building code it's +1, but you could do +2, +3. I believe my understanding is in Mexico Beach, they established an elevation across large geographic areas based on the event.
What beach?
Mexico Beach. So that's my understanding of Mexico Beach. They adopted a base flood elevation, or I guess a design flood elevation that becomes for their community based on that storm, not based on maps. And you have the right to do that as a local government.
But we are not. We're not anticipating new FEMA maps coming out anytime soon.
No, I think the gentleman is correct in that there's data. We could evaluate and study and make a choice locally to use that data. You could also adopt to a 500-year event. You could adopt to a 1,000-year event. Right? There's all kinds of choices you can make locally to build higher standard.
And when FEMA in the future decide to reevaluate their maps, yes, they're going to take into consideration what happened at this storm. But right now, the maps that we just adopted are going to be in place for a while.
Correct. When they do their studies, they generally go into all the history that they can find, documented evidence of watermarks and elevations and survey data every storm. Because I've been involved on the risk map side of it for many communities on this West Coast, working for those communities, trying to review what FEMA was producing, making sure it was as accurate as possible. And so they go back to 1960s, 1950 hurricanes and try to find the best documentation possible. This one will become part of that future analysis. Absolutely.
I'd also like everyone to know that agendas are, I printed this at home myself last night. Agendas and packets are always available on the town's website. It's available to the public as soon as it's available to the committee members or to the council members for that matter. So the information is available to the public. So I just wanted to clarify that too. Okay. Is there any other discussion on LDC text amendment for the building codes and floodplain management? And if there is not, may I have a motion, please, to approve with the comments we've made and forward it to the town council?
Move it.
I'm not sure what that means. So,
well, just so like we noted to Jason and as the gentleman talked about the temperature control, the design standards, the glass, the doors, so they'll hear all of that. unless you want to make some specific recommendations.
I'd like to make a specific recommendation.
Go right ahead.
Maybe Don can amend his motion. I think any reference to coastal A when it's on, so basically lumping in coastal A with V zone, when it's associated specifically with a regulation that only used to apply to V zones, that we strike that if it's optional. I think the caveat that I would have when Jason talks about some of those areas were V zones, became coastal A, and I guess they could potentially go back to V zones eventually. I would just say that as a courtesy, the town should let people know.
Hold on, Patrick. Don, would you remove your motion for the time being
Yeah.
so we can discuss this?
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead. So let me just ask, does everybody agree with Patrick's comment about this? Okay, go ahead, Patrick.
So I don't know if that's accurate. I'm just kind of reading to what you're saying. So if you're in a zone where it used to be V, it's coastal A, could potentially go back to V in the future. My recommendation is when people come in for permits, say, you used to be a V, you're a coastal A. If I were you, I'd build with pilings. You know, I would hope that we would tell that to people, give them options, but again, I think it was echoed by our friend, the architect in the crowd, but Florida Building Code does a pretty good job in my eyes right now, and I think if we can just reference the Florida Building Code as best we can and FEMA minimum requirements as best we can and keep it at that is what I would recommend.
Okay, now how do we, Don, you want to make a shot at it?
Yeah, I guess a move to recommend with the amendments as highlighted by the committee members on the finished space, or on the finished space under building space, to include openings and doors, windows and doors, and temperature control. Not to encourage living area, but to allow temperature control in a unfinished space, parking and storage space. And then in addition, hopefully I say this right, Patrick's comments with respect to the coastal A, the new coastal A designation, and advising of the potential for a V later. Is that correct?
Is there?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so in the discussion, is that clear? And Jason, you looking like you want to jump
I think so.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, so in recap, removing the higher standard for the coastal A for residential and modifying and reducing or eliminating the standards of the below flood design criteria. I forget the section number, but related to windows, doors, and temperature control, where we're not in conflict with state or federal law.
Correct.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, there's a motion and a second. John, does this require a roll call? No. Okay. Okay, so having a motion and a second, is there any objection to that motion? That everyone's in favor, the motion passes unanimously with members as recorded previously absent. Gosh darn it, why can't, Ms. Sarah, do you remember the new gentleman's name? See, I feel so bad about that. Okay.
4-0, thank you.
Okay, so we're on to the next item, which is administrative agenda. Kristen, thank you for coming up, appreciate it. The administrative agenda, anything, Sarah? I'm dawning on this. I'm thinking we're having a discussion about setbacks. Mr. Lay is here to hear this, and it's not here.
Right. So on your agenda, we actually put the priority. Oh, we had 2021. Oops.
The priority list.
The priority list in the memo that Sarah provided was going to be under community development, but we can switch it around if you want, whenever you want to do it.
Okay, so let's just keep it in order for the moment. But let me just ask. So you want to discuss the setbacks under the priority list?
So the priority list was intended, I think, to Patrick's question request prior to the last meeting, low-hanging fruit and possible code items.
Let's move that up.
Our idea was to give you a list of some items that we know need to address. Some of it has to do with post-storm. Some of it has just been there forever. There's probably some other items that you want to address. And I think it's important if you help us prioritize those items, then maybe we can get into more detail.
So
I'd also like to give you an update on that, maybe a solution to the lots, the pre-town incorporation lots issue.
So Anita, just to clarify for the public, we're talking about having setbacks on a priority. Discussing that or making a motion on that item today.
Yep.
So that is, we were not able to finish that, but that'll be on your agenda the next time, is for a draft to do exactly what we just did with the flood ordinance, to review and tweak and edit, and then pass on hopefully a version for the town council to consider.
Okay.
And that's setbacks and corner lots.
Corner lots and side setbacks?
Yes.
Both?
So, Mr. Lay, that's going to be on our next agenda, not today. Okay. So, let's move the community development priority list ahead of our items and reports, and just to kind of have good flow here. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
Good morning, Sarah Probst with Community Development. As the town looks towards a great deal of redevelopment, there are many items in the Land Development Code that can be altered to effect change, improvements, and clarity. The staff report you were provided includes 6 areas of suggested code changes based on experience with this Land Development Code and the current state of the island. I'm just going to briefly go through each of those items so everybody present is aware of what was included there.
Thank you.
Establishing minimum seawall height. As redevelopment occurs, many seawalls may need to be replaced. This is a good time for the town to examine best practices that are being used around the state to find a height that will protect lots during high tide events and potential small flooding events. It would be a good idea to set this as a standard that every new wall being built is set at the same height.
Sarah, could I just ask you a question on that? That's a seawall, whether that's a canal, a bayfront, or a gulf-front home?
We're looking mostly at canal and bay. We're not looking as much at the Gulf. The Gulf side would hopefully be protected by dunes to a certain extent.
We don't allow new seawalls at this point.
You know, there's just been a constant hum about armoring walls, and I think that should be part of the discussion.
Yes.
I mean, I think we need to talk about it. It either needs to stay on the table or get off the table.
Okay, so we'll add that as a discussion for next meeting. That is much more nuanced than I'm prepared to speak about. Obviously, we have a beach renourishment program going on, so we'd have to involve, I would like Chad and whoever else from the town can, or outside council, or outside advisors. Yes.
So for the meantime, when we talk about seawalls, we're only going to talk about canal and bayfront homes.
But we can include the beachside walls in that discussion also.
Thank you.
Another item that could be evaluated are the existing dock regulations. Currently, the regulations allow a dock to extend 25% into a waterway, but there isn't provided a way to measure that. Is it wall to wall as it exists? Is it the easement as was platted? Because these, as seawalls were built, sometimes some property was added. We just want to make sure that everything is being measured in the same way so that the canals are still navigable. Yep, exactly. Another option would be to shorten the decision-making processes. Currently, the LPA is the recommending body to the town council for special exceptions and variances. So this requires an LPA hearing and then a town council hearing. You have the opportunity to actually change this process so that the LPA would be the decision-making, and then if someone wanted to appeal your decision, they could take it to the town council. So it would be an option to shorten that process. Another thing that you may want...
Can we just be clear before anyone gets hysterical over that? Because I could see that happening. This is just a discussion.
Yes.
We're not saying we're going to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, just because I can
It's
I
not,
can hear
it's
it
not
right now.
unusual. Sometimes
Yep.
all the authorities bestowed upon you, other than rezonings and
Yep.
comprehensive plan amendments and text amendments, right? Those things are, because those are legislative, are up to the council. So
Yep.
that's their responsibility by law, and then everything else is entirely up to you and what your duties are through your LDC. And it's not uncommon to have
Right.
that.
Right. Could I, with if you all agree, could we add in here in the shortening of approval times to reestablish some administrative approvals?
You were reading my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we
It was
could
on my
tie
list.
that in
So
the same discussion.
What we will do is bring back that item for discussion,
And maybe bring
because
back,
we have them. We just haven't used them for the most part, because frankly, it's a lot, and there's been misapplication of it at times. And so I think under previous administration, it was, let's not, it's a political, here's what I'll tell you to set this up.
It absolutely was, yeah.
Staff does not want to be the go-between, or doesn't want to be lobbied for decisions.
Yep.
We want to be technical in nature. We don't want to be making decisions that then we're being approached, they or us being approached by political entities or neighbor-to-neighbor things. We want to be isolated from that as much as possible.
And in looking at, I was looking at Lee County, there are administrative deviations. Most of them are technical in nature.
That's right.
And I think if we're talking more like a setback issue, I think something like that, you could do a threshold. So you have that mandate from the LPA and council of, if it only deviates from the existing by X%, then you guys can make that decision. So it doesn't, again, I know you don't want to stick your neck out and get into middle politics, but if we establish thresholds, I think that gives you the opportunity to just go.
If the policy is clear, it shouldn't be difficult to accomplish. It's a big if, though. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Another item that could be looked at is the setbacks for homes in non-residential districts. Currently, the non-residential districts don't have any carve-out for residential properties. So if you're in the downtown district, you could have a setback of 0 to 10 feet. Is that appropriate for houses? I mean, it certainly is applied in cities that way, so it could continue that way, but if there's interest in having front yards for houses, this is the time to consider that as an option. Another option is to look at the residential stormwater requirements. Currently, stormwater is applied to each individual residential lot. This makes the review and the design a little bit heavier. It would be an option to remove the individual lot stormwater requirements and instead just limit the amount of fill that can be brought into a lot, so that we can ensure that whenever somebody's developing, they're not mounding up their lot and dumping their stormwater on their neighbor. If they have to keep it a certain percent slope or below, and not bring in over a certain amount of fill, that may resolve the stormwater issue and make redevelopment simpler. Another option to look at is potentially increasing the height of houses along the beach. I know that in the past that this has been an issue, but with homes being built along the beach, the FEMA elevation is going to be very high. So the height limitations won't feel effective, essentially. If you're starting out 17 feet in the air and then you're building potentially up to 35 feet above that. So this might be an opportunity to look at maybe increased side setbacks on those properties, but allow additional height and additional story, so that homes can still, you can still have the same square footage, but maybe that way we can preserve some of the view of the water. That if everybody has to build these very tall homes, you're not having the cottages on the beach anymore. So this is a potential way to allow visibility of the beach and allow the homeowners or the property owners to have the square footage that they desire along the water.
That's just beachfront? Sorry, Jane.
Go ahead.
Is that just beachfront?
that's what we were looking at, but it could be possibly applicable in other places. However, we have heard, a lot of concerns with the increased side setbacks, so that probably isn't something we want to do. And it's really the VE zone, or I guess the coastal A zones, that are going to have the highest elevations. When you get towards the middle of the island, they're not as tall, so you're not talking about putting a house on what is currently almost a two-story house.
Right, but even a VE zone with the side setbacks and the on a water setback, you're going to have to go higher, so you're going to have to go with another level. So to me, the V zones ought to be looked at as well.
Yeah.
Why would we limit this? Why would we limit this off-front properties?
Well, in the comprehensive plan, there is a lot of talk about views of the water. So that would be sort of going along with the idea that the town values that view shed.
Well, as we've already really discussed before, there is a way of regulating plants and other things that can be put up for privacy and other things. So we're not really regulating that. The cost to go up another floor is tremendous, and requiring a setback to get people to have to go up one more floor to get their square footage is a tremendous expense.
But Jane, this is another one of those recurring topics, and I think it warrants a discussion by the LPA to either move it on or move it off.
Well, I do think that it's important to architectural design and be able to have and
I think that could be part of that discussion.
And Jane, I think that'll be a great discussion, because I hear what you're saying with landscaping, but I would like people to start thinking about not just water views. We're talking about just not creating a canyon effect. And the best example of that is right south of us on Hickory Boulevard. And we just have to kind of keep that in mind. Do we want to do anything, or we want to essentially have regulations that would allow that? And I think that'll be a great discussion.
Yep. Okay. And thank you, Sarah. Is there anything that anybody else has they'd like to add to this list?
Are we going to try to decide what order we want to do these, or are they all going to come at us at one time, or?
No, this is really a list of items that we came up with. There are certainly more items that can be looked at here. And if there are certain items in this list that you don't like and you're not interested in discussing, we don't have to bring it forward. So this is really up to you. These are your priorities.
Well, Sarah, I think shortening the approval times for certain, I think that whole process, these processes is essential right now that we discuss that. So the sooner the better we discuss that and get that recommendation onto the council, the better.
Yeah, so priority and removal of items for discussion are our priority of what you discuss, and then other things can kind of fall into place.
I would make this number one,
Yeah.
just because of procedurally it's going to help the most people.
Okay.
Yeah, I think most of these things on the list are all about rebuilding and redevelopment, and anything we can do to expedite that is going to get our residents back to where they want to be. So
I think this list is great. I think that's what we want to see, is a game plan, and now it's starting to feel like there's a game plan, and people know what'll be coming up. A few things maybe to add on there. I know we're looking at priorities and low-hanging fruit. Non-conforming lots, I know it'll be a little messy. And also,
What was, Patrick, I didn't understand what you said.
non-conforming lots.
Non-conforming lots.
Yeah, so like lots that are too small with today's standards. And then what goes hand in hand with some of those is some of those non-conforming lots have setbacks of, let's say, 5 feet, or maybe even less than 5 feet. And how much leeway are we willing to provide to let people try to build back their existing footprint? So I think that would be a great discussion. And I think if we don't touch upon this quickly, I know at least 2 people saying I'm coming in with a variance real soon on the issue. So
I would almost move this ahead of the processes, just because I think you said there were dozens of these properties, these little non-conforming lots last time. I said, well, how many could there be? And I thought you said dozens.
No, there's a certain area of the beachfront that has a couple examples of easements that come off of Estero, and then they have a mix of the size of the lots. And it's interesting because there's an example where there's 4 cottages on one side of the easement, comes straight down from Estero. There's 4 cottages on the other side of the easement, so you have 8 units accessing a 10-foot easement. So that's a whole nother piece of this, right, is to evaluate and consider safety, fire access, emergency. Because again, with non-conforming things, the goal is codes don't allow that today. Eventually you want them to go away, but then we also have to find that balance, right? So in this case, you have 4 and 4, but you have one side, the 4 are subdivided into parcels.
Yep.
The other side, the 4 is one parcel. Today, they could not subdivide that one parcel, but we have what we have on the other parcels, right? So it's an evaluation of timing. And under the current code that we discussed, I think in the last meeting, that people came and were concerned about what happened.
right.
Current code recognizes it essentially a lot of record if it's meets and bounds, not a platted lot. You don't have lot 7, lot 10, 12, whatever. You have a description, legal description, that is prior to the incorporation of the town, but also dimensions. And it was that 45, I think it was 45 by 75, 45 width, 75 length minimum, you have to have those, and also be prior to the town incorporation. Previously, we've edited that section and removed it used to have a 4,000 square feet minimum lot size in addition to all that. There's a bunch of platted lots on the north side of town that were 3,800 square feet.
That's where those people's houses were, the north end.
But they didn't meet the 4,000, but they met the other criteria. So we edited that section to allow those to be recognized because it was a platted lot. It should be, frankly, and it's on a road. It's got utilities. Should be able to build on it. These ones are different where they're probably less than that, but it's the dimensions that, and so an easy fix to that is to get rid of the dimension requirement and just recognize lots that were created and have been recognized prior to the town's adoption.
Can we have that on our next agenda?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
because I think that would resolve
really
those
would.
people,
It sure would.
that came.
Yep.
Now, I don't know.
And there are probably more of those.
I don't know what Pandora's box that opens,
Yeah.
but it deals with a timing issue.
Absolutely.
Which is actually pretty typical, is to rely on a time rather than
Yep.
some other. And other communities put in criteria, and A, B, C, and D. I just want to caution people that this is not an opportunity to create new lots.
No. No.
We're also
No.
going to, I think we can edit the language that's in there. It says direct access to a paved road that's public, that's blah, blah, blah. We need to tweak that to recognize an easement and frontage and make that a little bit more clear in there, so we can edit that section pretty
Good. So
quickly.
you've been thinking about it, I can tell.
Only for a month, yeah.
Anything
So-
else, Patrick?
I'm sorry.
Jane, go ahead.
So we're moving the single-family setbacks and non-conforming lots and corner lots to the first?
Well, they're kind of, the shortening the approval times, I don't think this is going to be a very long discussion. So maybe these are on the same agenda.
Well, I think it depends also on how much time Sarah has to research some of those issues, because like the non-conforming
That's right.
lots, I think it's going to take a while. You have to figure who it's going to affect. We don't want unintended consequences. So
Yep.
I think it depends on. Go ahead.
So, just so you're aware, at the next meeting, we already have pink shell, CPD amendment, corner lots and side setbacks. If we want to do shortening the process and then non-conforming lots, that's going to be a very heavy agenda.
And
we can do it,
And we may
but-
have
That's enough.
4 other applications.
That's enough.
Or the what?
4 other applications
Ooh.
On
that Sarah doesn't know about. So.
That's very long.
It's a long one, but we need it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I was going to suggest, is doing a workshop, a whole day, plan the whole day, because it's going to take a while, but we ought to get it to finality. We ought to get it to a place where staff can take it and we can move it forward.
And a place where we can hear.
Right.
Well,
That would be nice
part,
as well.
No control. So I believe our goal is to get as many applications that are in-house and processing in front of you as possible in the next meeting.
Okay.
So that's probably at least 3,
Okay.
maybe 5, up to 5.
3, maybe 5.
In addition to that, we can do the MUD, which is the non-conforming lot conversation that we just talked about. And I think you need to choose from here what is a top priority from this list that we could do quickly and include in that, and then everything else we could kind of work on, to Patrick's point of research, and or eliminate something from the list would even be better, frankly.
Yep. So if we were going to add something to that, would it be the shorten the approval times? Yep, I agree. Okay.
It's a sentence or two edit to the minimum use. Sorry.
So
Minimum use determination.
Minimum use determination.
you're adding that to the January 10th meeting?
Correct. If that's what you want. My understanding is that has an effect on people's decisions on rebuilding and property ownership and sales and everything else. So
for the January meeting, we should probably plan on a midday break at some point. Okay, like lunch.
my assumption with a yes. Now again, some of that's subject to the applicant also being ready. We think they are. They've been asking. So
And if they're not ready, could we bring in the residential setbacks if they're not ready?
Seriously,
That would be there.
Yeah, the corner lots and setbacks are already going to be part of that discussion. I haven't finished that
So
staff
you're
report.
combining both the corner lots and the setbacks?
Oh,
for single-family?
So I'm not talking about the non-residential zoning districts. I'm talking about the setbacks that were changed to the 15%.
So that's going to come back with the corner lots?
Yes,
Oh,
that's
yay.
correct.
Great.
Yeah, I was trying to combine those. I wanted
think
them to
that's
be
really important, because I think it's confusing when we only talk about corner lots. Everybody assumes we're talking about all lots.
Yeah, and I didn't want to cause additional
I love
confusion
it.
by actually incorporating it
Good job.
originally.
So I had some other recommendations maybe. I think this is an awesome list for the low-hanging fruit. I think you guys can maybe produce a list of longer-term items, just so we know what to plan for and the community knows what to plan for. And one of those things might just be sitting down with, bringing in the consultant that's working on the comp plan and kind of talking some of the concepts that they're looking at incorporating in there. I think that would be useful for us to start thinking about that, and also useful for the development entities that are looking at redeveloping to know if they're consistent with what those concepts are out there, and they can start making their decisions and kind of try to incorporate that in their projects.
Yep. Okay, is there anything else? Don, you have anything? Jane, do you have anything?
And the last thing is, if I'd like council to consider that. I know there's been discussion about vision and the amount of time that takes and how you get there, and we have other priorities right now as a town. But I think what could be done pretty quickly and what could be very useful for everybody is a quick and dirty visual preference survey. So I think you guys as planners know what that is.
Visual preference survey?
Yes, so you can have the whole community attend a workshop. People can even do it remotely on their cell phones, and you project slides of, here are 3 or 4 architectural different looks. What do you prefer, A, B, or C? People punch it in their phone.
That would be fantastic.
So
We might
just-
surprise ourselves.
No, you won't. You will surprise yourself at implementation of the policy. But yes,
Yes.
That's what I mean.
But I think what that could do is, some development entities would probably like to move faster than the town is going right now in adopting comp plan changes. So at least they could probably refer to that and say, we heard what the public said. We incorporated those things within our proposal to the town. And then obviously it's going to go through the public hearing process and it's going to be vetted completely. But at least a development entity can point back to, that's what I heard from the residents. They like this architectural style, or they like, these types of uses.
So just so that I understand, would you be most interested in looking at density, massing, height, like
typical.
all of it? Or like, is there a specific?
Well, my thing is, I know this takes time and this takes money to get this done. So I'm proposing it, and I think you guys can kind of work it out of, can we do a light version of this quickly? And again, you know, I'm sure you guys are capable of doing that, and there's other folks out there that can do that. But I think that'd be something that can be done quickly and relatively inexpensively. That would be very helpful.
And that's fine. That's something we've done and can do. I will say, what it always comes down to is ultimately tricking people's eye, and it's getting them to understand and open their minds of density's bad, they think, and then they see something, they really like it, and then you tell them, well, that was 50 units an acre. And they're like blown away and they don't understand. So it's an educational piece I think could be beneficial to the public. Where my point was, ultimately, when you write the policy, you write that number in a policy, whatever number it is, then people get cold feet and get scared. So it's building that base of understanding and knowledge, but we got to make sure whatever the preference is, we can implement it and carry it forward. Yeah. That's going to be a key part.
And I think what it plays to, and I'd rather not say trick in the eye, but the term we use as planners is it's about people react to form.
That's right.
And the thing
Make
is,
your vision visual.
The static numbers of maximum height and density sometimes work against us. I think as a community, we want to emphasize form. We want to have attractive structures and livable structures that are consistent with the character of our town. And then if we have to be a little flexible on the density, intensity, and the height, then at least we can point back to visually, if we can get to this type of form, are you guys okay with that flexibility?
And I think another important element is, and I like what Patrick said, it could even, you could do that survey on your phone. But the other thing is for us to get in front of the economic push, so that the folks who actually live and work here are starting to talk about and make those decisions, as opposed to the economic push of, I just spent $37 million on the outrigger and here's what I'm going to build. So it would be nice that I would drop all of this and make that my #1 priority in an ideal world.
So one of the other things that we've internally talked about, and haven't asked anybody that can approve it yet, but I guess I might as well talk about it here, is that language. And I think the best way to probably do this comp plan is distribute the future land use element to you, rather than have someone come in and talk to you again, let you read it, get confused by it, write some notes, and then we can have a conversation about it. That probably works better. At the same time, one of the ideas that we had was trying to set up kind of a town hall meeting style based on geography for the non-residential commercial components, and talk to them. I lost a hotel. What can I do? What does this comp plan look like for me potentially? And explain it to them and have it more of a one-on-one situation rather than 50 people sitting in a room peppering with questions. So we would like to, whether it's through an appointment, but have a couple days where we can move down the island geographically and focus on those. So that was one of the ideas that we had also.
No, that's a great idea. And what I would say is, to me, what's more important is to have that plan in place, right, and to communicate that plan as soon as possible. The implementation may take a while, yep, and I think anybody that's looking at redeveloping something significant know that it's going to take a while. They want to get started, but getting the design, getting the permits, getting the approval will take a while. So I think right now it's just let's make sure we have a game plan. Let's communicate that game plan, and then we can take the right amount of time to get things done properly.
Yep. Okay. Anything else, Sarah or Jason, on that?
So we have the MUD,
yep, minimum use
non-conforming
determination.
lots,
Yep.
corner lot and setbacks. I think you said process for the public hearings, and then whatever applications we have that are coming forward. Is that?
Okay.
All right. That's a good 8-hour day
long
right
day.
there. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And just the challenge is, you mentioned printing. We're limited in what resources physical we have here at the town as far as printing packets and all that, printing poster size maps. It's very difficult, not to make excuses. Notifications, getting postcards out and mailing to people.
Yeah, you all are challenged, but you'll rise to the occasion. I have all that faith.
We're coming up with ideas to overcome that, but it's posting signs. There's no,
The Lakes Regional Library is offering free printing for anybody who lives on the beach. And you can go, I went to the library and printed my packet. The problem was I couldn't get the FEMA maps to download. Yep. So if you could at least have the maps here for us to pass around and see, that would be helpful.
I'll try. We lost our printed copies of them, but we'll try to get them out to print. And we don't have any say over where or when.
Can we just project them?
Yeah, that would be good if we could just project them. But
You're not going to be able to read it. I was hoping everybody could bring a laptop and see them on their own computers, but
Jason, I understand that meetings might move to a more civilized facility. Is that going to be true?
my understanding is there's an effort to find better accommodations for everybody.
For that long meeting or no?
I understood as of January.
Above my pay grade, so.
It's very hard to hear at times.
It's horrible.
It's hard to have a.
You know, the interesting thing is if you go and listen to the meeting online, it's very clear because everybody's going, why are you all complaining about not being able to hear? Well, you should try it inside, you know? Okay, so.
I don't know when that is. I know there's an effort to find reasonable space.
Let's see if we can get clarification on that. Anything else, Jason or Sarah? Okay, I'm going to go now.
Off the list.
No, honey, no. As a matter of fact, other things might come to mind later.
Listen, but your point is there's certain things that we've rehashed 3 or 4 times. And so,
that's right.
You know, not to get on a soapbox, but we're getting feedback of the hardest part is the potential of things keep changing. So if you went from 3 years ago to 2 years ago to now in a couple months, that's making it really difficult for people. Sometimes they just want, give me the rules and let me go.
That's what everybody wants. Yeah.
Right, but when you keep changing it every...
But I have the feeling that what Patrick said the other day at the last meeting, he said that if he gave advice to somebody like he told the couple that were standing here, though they're not a couple, they're just 2 people, be patient. Be patient right now because as things solidify, so there is that patient path, which if I were doing it, that'd be my path. There's also the anxiety of, I better get what I can get right now because they're going to change it and it's going to be more restrictive and it's going to be this and that. So I guess it's two ways for people to think about it.
Yeah, so we're not bombarded by that. It's just, you know, consultants call and ask, architects, they call and ask, what's the rules and what's it going to be? I don't know.
Right.
So just be aware of that. And it's really the things that have changed multiple times and gone back and forth for the last few years.
Yes.
I think other things are pretty stable. So.
Okay.
And what I would say is, especially at the comp plan level, you know, looking for creating incentives. And if people say, well, you're creating a little uncertainty by changing the rules, is you can go in today with today's rules.
Sure.
You know what? Go in today, right now with those rules. What we're saying is you might have incentives in place and you might get something better than you would today. But those incentives are to create also public benefits. So the public should understand that Mr. Developer might come in and maybe we'll create incentives for them to get certain things they want. But it's always with the understanding of those are incentives. We want to also see a public benefit. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, LPA items and reports. Don, do you have anything? Thank you. Patrick?
One last suggestion, Anita, if you might be interested in doing this, is I think it'd be great for us to have a LPA liaison with Beach Talk Radio to go in there and just give a recap of maybe what was discussed and what's coming up. Because again, we want people to pay attention to this and we want feedback. You know, the last thing we want is put the effort into a visual preference survey and we have 20 people provide feedback. So, and again, I think it's the best means of communication to the island residents right now is through that venue. So if you would be interested, I'd love to nominate you as our liaison.
I was just going to say, since you brought it up, I think
I was going to nominate him as.
I was thinking the same. I'm sorry, Patrick.
Me too. I think it's. I mean, I'd be happy to, but since you brought it up, I think it would be a very good thing for you. I think people hear from me enough. It'd be nice to have another face out there.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, you know, our town PIO and all that information, but I agree, it's another audience, and you just can't talk about this enough right now. So thank you. Okay. Jane, do you have any items?
Yes. I just,
Honey, your microphone's not on.
coming over the bridge this morning, there's a guy that is there all the time with a cowboy hat. He's standing underneath the flag and waving everybody coming on. Does anybody know the story? Who he is?
I don't know, but he's very pleasant looking.
But it's such a nice thing to
Waves to
smile
every
at.
car.
Yeah.
Huh?
He waves to every
Yeah,
car.
it's lovely. I don't know who he is or what the story is, but I'd
Standing
like to
under
know.
the flag.
Secondly, I want to compliment both of you on the blue and white check theme. Did you guys call each other this morning? No? Every day. Okay, otherwise, have a happy holidays and looking forward to the January 10th meeting.
Okay, I don't have anything other than to thank you guys for the extraordinary work you're doing under these extraordinary conditions, and that goes to all the staff members here. So thank you all.
Comment. Sarah, did you have a
did you have
comment?
something?
It was about the visual preference survey. Jason mentioned that he was like, didn't we do one for another community? And we got 300 respondents. I mean, it was a very successful survey. So
Wonderful.
We can do
Wonderful.
something like that also.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
And we've done a survey for this, just nobody remembers it. I don't remember how many responses we got, and we did. We did about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and nobody. I guess nobody that's here got it. So we'll dust off a shorter version
we'll
of
all
that.
promote
and improve
it, and it will.
Right, and it'll be much more visual. So
Yeah. Yes.
Make sure Patrick has it for his
thing.
interview
Yeah.
also. So,
Mr. Herron.
Yes,
your
I
items.
just wanted to, before we get to public comment and then adjournment, I wanted to respond to Ms. Plummer's question about the 1 year. So the statute says that it creates a presumption that if you sell the property within, or lease the property within 1 year, that you violated the owner-builder statute exemption, building permit exemption, and that the government can take action against you. The point I want to make is I want to emphasize the word presumption. So if someone were to come and say, well, I need to sell or I need to lease because of the following issues, then the town could take that into consideration. As to the issue of someone passing away, if their estate is probated, if they get a court order saying, hey, we need to sell this property because the prior owner is deceased, then certainly the town would take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Herron. I'll open it. I'll now ask for public comment. Is there any public comment? Lady Panther? I just want you to know I was a Panther, Cypress Lake Panther.
Well, I'm a teacher there, so thank you.
Well, thank you for that.
And first of all, I know that what I'm coming to you guys with is like the lowest on your priority list, but however, the issues started with the LPA, and so now I'm bringing it back to you. I live at 4841 Dolphin Lane, and I am in the property adjacent to Bayfront Bistro.
You're adjacent to Bayfront Bistro. Okay. Yep.
Okay. Back in 2006, when Smith Mike Marina went through redevelopment, we worked very closely with the LPA to make sure that the expansion of the restaurant was going to was going to have certain safeguards to make sure that the residential neighborhood was not going to be negatively impacted.
I remember.
Over the years, as we get new managers and new owners, they decide they want to go bigger and better, which I understand. That's part of a business. However, strictly written into the LPA code, and I brought it if you'd like to see it, it says that the restaurant may not have any sort of outdoor music.
Yeah.
Nothing canned, nothing live. I have gone repeatedly and spoken to the general managers. The same general manager, Rebecca, has been there since 2018. And I've spoken to her on, 2020. I've spoken to her in 2020, 2021, and now after all of this, when we've come back. We are very fortunate. We sustained minimal damage, and we are able to live in our home. However, I also have two other families who are living in our home. My sister-in-law lived on Ibis Street, and my aunt, AJ Bassett, lived on Mandalay. Her house is completely destroyed. She's an 88-year-old woman, and she's suffering from dementia. We can't open our doors when it's lovely weather because we have the music next door pounding through the house. She can't sit out on the back deck and watch the birds, which which is one of the few things that she enjoys to do, because of the music issue. I've reached out to town council through the website. I've filed a complaint officially after trying to deal with the restaurant on a one-on-one basis, and they told us, too bad, so sad, we're going to do what we're going to do. I only had one person reply, and that was the code enforcement officer. He had a few email exchanges with me and then told me that our new interim town manager told the restaurant, yeah, go ahead and play music, it's not a problem. And you cannot make changes to existing ordinances without public hearing and going through the approval process. So I've reached out to our town manager, I've reached out to our mayor. I couldn't find Jason's email anywhere on the website. I've reached out to, I'm not sure who Amy is. I've reached out to everybody that I can. Danielle, I believe, is the assistant to the town manager. She did respond and asked me for my phone number to have a casual conversation with the town manager about Bayfront Bistro, and I haven't heard anything back. So now I'm at you guys, because this is where it all started. You guys set forth, you worked with us, you set forth the ordinance saying no music. What do I do now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who has comment for public hearing? For the public comment? Seeing no one else, public comment is closed, and I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Any objections to adjourning?
Seconded, my thing wasn't on.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned.